My name is Natalie, and I am 34 years old. I never imagined that the man I married would one day look me in the eye, shove me into the pitch-black darkness of a cold stone cellar, and turn the heavy iron lock trapping me and our 8-year-old son inside. My husband and his mistress thought they had won. They thought locking us away in our own storage room would force me to surrender my historic estate so they could steal it to fund his failing business. While my son cried out in terror, I simply held him close and whispered that they had no idea what I had hidden behind the back wall of this very cellar 9 years ago. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart the very people who were supposed to protect you. The deafening clack of the heavy deadbolt sliding into place echoed like a gunshot through the damp air. The single flickering bulb in the hallway snapped off, plunging my son Leo and me into absolute suffocating darkness. I stumbled forward, my hands scraping against the rough oak planks of the heavy cellar door. I slammed my fists against the wood, the impact sending sharp pain shooting up my arms. But the door did not even budge. It was solid oak reinforced with iron hardware, a feature of this historic estate that I had painstakingly preserved as a real estate appraiser. Now that same historic preservation was being used to entomb us. "Mommy, it is too dark in here." Leo whimpered, his tiny hands gripping the hem of my sweater so tightly I could feel him trembling. The cold of the cellar floor was seeping through my jeans, and the damp smell of aged stone filled my lungs. Leo let out a soft sob, burying his face into my shoulder. My heart broke for him, but my blood boiled at the monster standing on the other side of that door. I knelt down on the cold stone floor, pulling his small body against my chest. "It is okay, sweetheart," I murmured, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I am right here. We are going to be fine." Outside the door, the sound of Bradley pacing back and forth was heavy and erratic. His dress shoes clicked sharply against the hardwood floor of the main hallway. When he finally spoke, his voice was distorted with a kind of manic desperation I had never heard from him before. "Listen to me, Natalie," Bradley shouted, slamming his hand against the other side of the door. "I am not playing games anymore. Give me the PIN code to the family trust right now. Do not make this harder than it has to be." I stood up, keeping one arm wrapped securely around Leo. "You are out of your mind, Bradley," I yelled back, my voice vibrating against the thick wood. "You locked your own son in a freezing cellar. Open this door immediately before I call the police." Bradley let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "Call them with what?" "I took your phone out of your purse while you were pouring tea. You have nothing down there. You have no way out. Now give me the damn pin. You care more about this moldy antique house than you do about your own husband's future. My startup is $2 million in debt, Natalie. $2 million. I am losing everything, and you are sitting on a gold mine just so you can play historic preservationist." I could hear the absolute entitlement bleeding through every word he spoke. This was not a sudden emotional snap. This was a calculated attack. For months he had been failing bleeding money into a tech company that had no real product, and instead of taking responsibility, he had set his sights on the one thing I had built with my own hands before I even met him. "I am not signing over the deed to my home to cover your bad business decisions," I shouted back, refusing to let him hear any fear in my voice. "This house is in an irrevocable trust. It is not marital property, and you know it." "Then you had better figure out a way to break that trust today," Bradley screamed, hitting the door so hard that dust rained down from the ceiling. "You and the kid can sit in the dark and think about your priorities. You are not coming out until that deed is signed over to my holding company. I need the collateral for the bank by this afternoon, or I am completely ruined. You are my wife, and you owe me this." Before I could answer, Bradley, the sharp, unmistakable click of stiletto heels, echoed down the hardwood stairs. The steps were unhurried and deliberately loud. I pulled Leo closer to my side, feeling his heartbeat racing against my own chest. "Bradley, honey, you are getting too worked up." A sugary, sweet voice drifted down through the brass air vent set into the top of the oak door. It was Kelsey. She was 29 years old, Bradley's supposed financial consultant for his tech startup. Now I knew exactly what kind of consulting she was doing behind my back. Hi, Natalie. Kelsey cooed through the vent. I know it is a little chilly down there, but you really left us no choice. You have been acting so erratic lately. We are just worried about your mental health. Her tone made my stomach turn into a knot of pure disgust. Get away from my house, Kelsey, I warned, keeping my voice low and steady. When I get out of here, I am pressing charges against both of you for unlawful imprisonment. Kelsey let out a theatrical sigh that echoed down the stairwell. Oh, sweetie, who do you think the police are going to believe? The successful tech CEO or his poor unstable wife who has been having a severe mental breakdown for months? I froze, staring at the sliver of light coming through the vent. What are you talking about? You really thought that brain fog was just stress from your job? Kelsey laughed, a sharp sound that bounced off the stone walls. Did you honestly believe you were just tired from working too hard on your real estate appraisal reports? I have been telling Bradley for months that you needed help. That is why I suggested the chamomile tea every night. It was so easy, Natalie. A few crushed sedatives in your cup while Bradley and I went over the company financials in your kitchen. You drank it right down and went to sleep while we planned our future. The revelation hit me like a physical blow to the chest, the crushing fatigue I had experienced over the last 3 months. The mornings I could barely wake up to make Leo his lunch for school. The Dr. Bradley had insisted I see a man who prescribed me anti-anxiety medication after a mere 10-minute consultation. It was all a massive, highly coordinated setup. They had been poisoning me under my own roof. Dr. Evans is a very close friend of mine. Kelsey continued, her voice dripping with poison. He has already documented your severe paranoia and delusions. If you call the cops, Bradley will just show them your medical files. He will tell the authorities you locked yourself in the cellar during a manic episode. They will put you in a psychiatric hold, and I will be the one picking Leo up from school from now on. Is that what you want? A new mommy for your little boy? Leo whimpered at the sound of her vicious words, burying his face deeper into my sweater. I do not like her, Mommy, he whispered. I know, baby, I murmured, stroking his hair. She is not going to hurt us. Just sign the papers. Natalie Bradley interjected, his voice returning to the vent. The notary will be here very soon. I will slip the documents under the door. You sign them, and we open the door. You can go pack a bag and leave quietly. If you fight this, you are going straight to a mental ward, and I am taking full custody of Leo. The sheer audacity of their plan was staggering. They had weaponized my own health against me. They had invaded the safety of my kitchen, my bedroom, and my mind. Any normal person would have broken down right then and there. Any normal person would have screamed, kicked the heavy oak door, or begged for mercy. I felt the urge to cry, to scream until my throat bled. But then I looked down at my son. I felt the solid, historic stones beneath my boots. This was my house. I knew every single inch of its foundation, every secret buried deeply within its walls. They thought I was a weak and sedated housewife. They had completely forgotten what I did for a living. I will give you 5 minutes to think about it, Kelsey sneered. Enjoy the dark. Their footsteps retreated, moving back upstairs toward my living room. The silence of the cellar rushed back in, heavy and oppressive. Mommy, are we going to be stuck here? Leo asked, his voice trembling in the pitch black. I took a deep breath, letting the icy air fill my lungs. The fear that had gripped me moments ago completely evaporated, replaced by a cold, calculating rage. I realized in that exact moment that there was no saving my marriage, and there was no reasoning with these monsters. The only thing left to do was survive and destroy them. No, sweetheart, I said, my voice completely steady. We are not stuck. They are. I did not scream. I did not bang on the door anymore. Instead, I turned my back to the heavy oak wood. Keeping one hand firmly over Leo's shoulder, I guided him away from the door and began walking calmly straight into the deepest and darkest corner of the underground cellar. I reached the back wall, running my free hand over the damp, rough-hewn stones. This house was built in the early 1920s, right at the height of Prohibition. It held structural secrets that a man like Bradley, who only valued things with a modern price tag, could never comprehend. I knelt down on the floor, tracing my fingers along the thick mortar lines until I found the specific deep groove I was looking for. I counted the heavy stones from the ground up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I pressed my palm flat against the cold surface of the fifth stone and pushed inward with all my weight. For a second, nothing happened. Then a low mechanical hiss echoed through the tight space. The sound of grinding rock and heavy metal shifting gears made Leo gasp and step back. A large section of the stone wall, a perfectly disguised steel door weighing several hundred pounds, popped outward and slowly swung open on heavy, well-oiled hinges. Soft amber LED lights flickered to life, automatically illuminating a hidden space that took my breath away the very first time I discovered it 9 years ago. It was a pristine, fully intact Prohibition-era speakeasy vault. The walls were lined with rich, dark mahogany paneling, and the floor was covered in intricate geometric mosaic tiles. Vintage leather club chairs sat perfectly preserved in the corners surrounding a beautiful, small, brass-fitted bar. I had spent 2 agonizingly detailed years of my life long before Bradley and I ever met, meticulously restoring every single inch of this room to its original historical glory. It was my private sanctuary, my absolute greatest professional triumph as an appraiser, and a secret I had never shared with my husband. "Mommy, what is this place?" Leo whispered, his wide eyes reflecting the warm amber light. His fear was completely gone, replaced by pure childhood wonder. I smiled, pulling him inside and letting the heavy stone door click shut behind us, sealing us in complete safety. The air in here was warm, dry, and heavily filtered. "This is our secret superhero base," I told him, crouching down to his eye level and zipping up his jacket. "I built it a long time ago just for us. The bad guys outside do not even know it exists, so we are going to stay in here, eat some emergency snacks, and watch them until the police come to take them away. Does that sound like a good plan?" Leo nodded eagerly, climbing into one of the oversized leather chairs and curling his legs underneath him. "You are a superhero, Mommy." I kissed his forehead. "I am about to be." I stood up and walked over to the vintage brass bar. Beneath the polished wood counter, hidden behind a decorative panel meant for concealing bootlegged whiskey, was something decidedly modern. I flipped a concealed switch, and the dark glass of the mirror hanging above the bar instantly transformed. It was a state-of-the-art high-definition smart screen. I pulled out a hidden keyboard, typed in a 12-digit alphanumeric passcode, and a grid of 16 different camera feeds popped onto the bright monitor. When I first bought this estate, I installed hidden microcameras in every single room and hallway. It was a standard precaution for high-value historic restorations. I needed to ensure contractors were not stealing antique fixtures or cutting corners while I was working off-site. After the renovations were finished, I simply left the system running and upgraded the cloud storage. Bradley, who was always too busy pretending to be a tech genius to actually understand how anything in his own home worked, never had the slightest clue that our entire property was wired for sight and sound. The cameras captured everything in crisp high definition, complete with crystal clear audio feeds. I watched the video stabilize, giving me a godlike view of the house above us. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I took in the scene playing out in my kitchen, my living room, and my hallways. There was Bradley pouring himself a glass of my most expensive bourbon, looking completely stressed as he checked his watch. Beside him was Kelsey, fixing her makeup in the reflection of my antique hall mirror, looking as smug and entitled as ever. They thought they had backed me into a corner. They thought I was sitting in the dirt, shivering and waiting to surrender my life and my property to them. Instead, I was sitting comfortably in a climate-controlled vault, watching their every move, holding the ultimate trump card. But as my eyes scanned the other camera feeds on the grid, My cold confidence was suddenly pierced by a fresh wave of shock. Bradley and Kelsey were not the only ones inside my house. The front door camera showed people walking into my foyer, and I recognized them immediately. The betrayal was running much deeper than a cheating husband and a greedy mistress. Through the crisp, high-definition feed of the entryway camera, I watched as the heavy mahogany front door swung open. My mother-in-law, Diane, strode into the foyer holding a chilled bottle of expensive champagne high in the air, as if she had just won the lottery. Right behind her was my sister-in-law, Rebecca, laughing loudly and carrying a stack of crystal flutes. They did not look like concerned family members stopping by for a visit. They looked like a raiding party arriving to celebrate a conquest. Bradley stepped out of the living room to greet them, wrapping his mother in a tight hug. Kelsey followed closely behind him, smiling brightly as she took the champagne bottle from Diane. There was no shock, no awkwardness, and no shame. They were all in on it. My own family by marriage. The people I had hosted for Thanksgiving dinners and bought expensive Christmas gifts for over the last 9 years were actively participating in my imprisonment and the attempted theft of my property. "Is it done yet?" Diane asked, walking past the antique console table without even taking off her winter coat. "Is that stuck-up little real estate appraiser finally out of the picture?" Bradley let out an exhausted sigh and ran a hand through his hair. "Not yet, Mom. She is being incredibly stubborn. I had to lock her and the kid in the cellar. I told her she is not coming out until she signs the deed over to the new holding company." Diane waved her hand dismissively, a gesture of absolute contempt that I had seen 1,000 times before. "Let her rot down there for a few hours. It will do her some good to finally learn her place. I always told you she was a cold, calculating woman, Bradley. She never fit into this family. From the day you married her, she acted like she was better than us, just because she owned this dusty old mausoleum. She never respected you as the head of the household." Rebecca chimed in, snatching a glass from the stack Kelsey was pouring. "Seriously, who cares about a bunch of old bricks and wood anyway? She should have sold this massive place years ago and given you the capital for your business. That is what a real supportive wife does. Instead, she hoards her wealth while my brother drowns in debt. It is completely selfish. Plus, I always hated how she looked down on us. Today, we finally balanced the scales. I sat in the vault, my hands trembling with a mixture of profound shock and rising fury. The audacity was breathtaking. They were standing in a house I had bought with my own hard-earned money long before Bradley even had his first failed startup idea. I had paid for the roof over their heads every time they overstayed their welcome. Now they were openly celebrating my downfall. Kelsey handed out the filled champagne flutes, her fake sweet smile plastered across her face. "Do not worry, Diane. The notary is on his way right now. As soon as Natalie signs the papers, the bank will wire the $2 million loan directly into Bradley's new business account. And the best part is, since her name is on the medical records for a psychiatric breakdown, she will never be able to contest the transfer in court. We have all the bases covered perfectly." Diane smiled warmly at her son's mistress, a level of genuine affection she had never once shown me. "You are an absolute lifesaver, Kelsey, a real partner to my son, not like that ungrateful woman in the basement." Bradley raised his glass, clinking it loudly against his mother's and his mistress's. "To taking control," he said proudly. "To taking back what is rightfully ours." They all cheered and took a long sip of the champagne. I watched my mother-in-law casually sip her drink while knowing her only grandson was locked in a freezing dark cellar beneath her feet. She did not even ask about Leo. She did not care if he was scared or cold. The only thing that mattered to her was the money and the sick satisfaction of seeing me completely destroyed. Leo tugged gently at my sleeve, his small face illuminated by the glow of the monitors. "Mommy, why is Grandma Diane saying those mean things about you? Why is she friends with the bad lady?" I looked down at my innocent son, feeling a fierce protective instinct surge through my veins. The last lingering shred of guilt completely vanished. They had drawn the battle lines, and they had chosen greed over their own blood. Because they are thieves, Leo, I said softly but firmly, looking back up at the screens. And thieves always stick together until the money runs out. I leaned forward, my fingers resting lightly over the smart home control panel integrated into the vault desk. They wanted to steal my home and my life, but they had made a fatal miscalculation. They had locked the owner inside the control room. I watched the screen labeled Kitchen Cam as my mother-in-law Diane strutted into my pristine culinary space. She immediately began opening the custom oak cabinets, running her hands over my expensive appliances with a look of undisguised envy. She slammed a drawer shut, her face twisting into a bitter sneer. "Look at this kitchen," Rebecca Diane called out to my sister-in-law, who had wandered in behind her, holding her champagne flute. "Bradley pays for all this high-end marble, and what does she do to show her gratitude? She treats him like he is a complete failure. She spends her days playing in the dirt looking at old moldy houses instead of being a proper wife." I sat in the vault and gritted my teeth. Bradley had never paid for a single slab of that marble. I designed, contracted, and funded that entire kitchen remodel down to the brass drawer pulls using the money I earned from my appraisal business. I had worked 80-hour weeks to build my reputation in the historic real estate market. Yet Diane always spun a delusional narrative to make her golden child son the provider, even while he was secretly drowning in massive business debt. Diane noticed my heavy leather appraisal satchel resting on the large center island. I had left it there after returning from a demanding site visit just before Bradley ambushed me in the hallway. Diane roughly unbuckled the leather straps and turned the bag upside down, dumping the contents directly onto the polished stone counter. Out tumbled my precision laser measuring tools, a stack of detailed architectural blueprints, and an antique brass magnifying loupe I used for inspecting historical masonry. The loupe was a rare graduation gift from my late mentor, easily worth over $2,000. "What is all this useless garbage?" Diane scoffed, picking up the antique loupe with her manicured fingers and examining it with pure disdain. "She thinks she is some kind of important historical scholar. She is basically just a glorified house cleaner and a junk collector. My son should have married a woman who understood corporate networking, a woman who could support his tech career instead of a woman obsessed with measuring damp basements." Kelsey strolled into the kitchen, then leaning against the doorframe and taking a slow sip of her drink. "I told Bradley we should just throw all her work files into the fireplace," Kelsey laughed. "Once the house is in his name, he will not have to put up with her little hobbies anymore." To my absolute horror, Diane casually tossed the antique brass loupe straight into the stainless steel trash can next to the island. It hit the bottom with a sickening metallic clatter that echoed through the hidden vault speakers. Then she grabbed my expensive laser measuring tools and callously swept them off the marble counter right into the trash alongside the loupe. "Good riddance," Diane muttered, dusting her hands off as if she had just performed a noble deed. "When Bradley sells this place, we are throwing all of her dusty old junk into a dumpster where it belongs. She never deserved any of this luxury anyway." In the safety of the vault, my hands curled into tight, trembling fists. The sheer disrespect for my profession, the very career that had literally kept a roof over their heads and food on their plates for nearly a decade, made my blood pressure spike dangerously high. I wanted to hit the intercom button right then and scream at her. I wanted to trigger the smart home security alarms to blast their eardrums and let them know I was watching every single malicious move they made. But I forced my hands to uncurl and relax. I took a slow, deep breath, focusing on the cold metal of the control panel beneath my fingertips. If I struck out at them right now, it would only be a minor annoyance. I needed to let them feel entirely victorious. I needed to let their arrogance blind them completely, so they would commit their crimes right in front of the hidden lenses. Throwing away my tools was petty vandalism. I was waiting to catch them in federal felonies. Every word they spoke, every item they destroyed, was currently being uploaded to 3 separate secure cloud servers. "Mommy, why did Grandma throw your special work things in the garbage?" Leo asked quietly, his small finger pointing at the bright monitor. Because she is a very jealous and small-minded woman, Leo. I answered softly, never taking my eyes off the high-definition screen. She is trying to erase the things that make me strong because it makes her feel powerful. But we are not going to let her win. We are going to let her dig a very deep hole, and then we are going to take away her shovel. Diane adjusted her designer scarf and turned her attention away from the trash can. "Where did Jamal go?" she asked, looking around the empty hallway behind Kelsey. "I thought he came in right behind us with the rest of the bags." I instantly shifted my gaze to the monitor labeled Master Bedroom, and my stomach dropped even further. Diane's petty cruelty down in the kitchen was one thing, but what my brother-in-law was doing upstairs crossed the line from spiteful behavior into outright grand larceny. He was tearing my private sanctuary apart. The master bedroom on the monitor looked like a hurricane had ripped through it. My custom-built walk-in closet, a space I had meticulously organized by color and season, was completely trashed. Designer dresses were pulled off their velvet hangers and thrown onto the hardwood floor. Silk scarves and cashmere sweaters were piled in a heap near the doorway. Standing in the middle of the wreckage was my sister-in-law, Rebecca, frantically digging through the drawers of my vanity table. But it was her husband Jamal who truly made the blood freeze in my veins. Jamal was a 40-year-old man who ran a supposedly legitimate pawn shop on the edge of the city. In reality, everyone in the family knew he dealt in shady transactions and handled stolen goods, though Diane always willfully ignored it. Right now, he was treating my bedroom like his own personal warehouse. He had a heavy canvas duffel bag unzipped on my bed, and he was methodically throwing my high-end leather handbags inside it. "Hurry up!" Rebecca Jamal barked, tossing a Chanel purse into the bag without a second thought. "Bradley said the notary is on his way. Once that guy gets here, we need to be downstairs acting like a happy family. Find the jewelry box. She has to keep the good stuff somewhere in this massive room." "I am looking!" Rebecca snapped back, her hands tearing through my velvet-lined jewelry trays. "But all I am finding is this cheap costume junk and a few silver rings. She must have a safe." Jamal shoved her out of the way, his large frame dominating the space. "Move over. You do not know how to look. A woman who buys a house like this does not leave her real ice sitting in a vanity drawer." I watched through the hidden camera as Jamal dropped to his knees and pulled out the bottom drawer of my heavy oak dresser. He reached his thick arm all the way into the dark cavity behind the drawer space. A sick feeling washed over me. I had hidden a small biometric lockbox back there years ago. It contained my most prized possessions, things I never wore but kept strictly for sentimental and investment value. "Got it," Jamal grunted, pulling the heavy steel box out and dropping it onto the mattress. "Jamal, that has a fingerprint scanner," Rebecca said, anxiously pacing nervously near the bedroom door. "We cannot open that. Maybe we should just stick to the designer bags. Bradley just wanted us to keep the crazy wife locked down while he got the house deed signed. He never said we could take her personal safe." Jamal let out a deep, booming laugh that sounded incredibly sinister through the vault speakers. "Bradley is a desperate idiot who is $2 million in the hole. He called us out here to do his dirty work because he did not have the guts to lock his own wife in the basement without backup. I am not doing this out of the goodness of my heart, Rebecca. This right here is my payment for services rendered." Jamal reached into his pocket and pulled out a heavy titanium pry bar, a tool he likely used regularly in his line of work. He jammed the sharp end directly into the seam of the lockbox. With a violent twist of his muscular arms, the reinforced steel gave way with a loud crack. The lid popped open. Inside the box sat a custom velvet display holding my late grandmother's heirloom jewelry collection. There was a stunning platinum necklace featuring a flawless 3-carat diamond center stone, accompanied by matching drop earrings and a vintage tennis bracelet. It was a collection I had legally inherited, completely separate from my marriage to Bradley. Rebecca gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Oh my God, Jamal! Look at the size of those stones!" Jamal pulled the necklace out, holding it up to the bedroom lighting like an expert appraiser. His eyes gleamed with pure, unrestrained greed. "Look at this ice," he muttered, his voice dropping into a low, impressed tone. "These are vintage cuts, completely untraceable once I pop them out of these antique settings. I have a buyer down in the Diamond District who does not ask any questions. He will give me $100,000 in cold hard cash by tomorrow morning for these stones alone." $100,000, Rebecca repeated, her anxiety instantly vanishing, replaced by the exact same sickening greed that infected her mother and brother. "Jamal, that would pay off our second mortgage completely. We could finally buy that boat you wanted." Jamal smirked, dropping the priceless heirloom necklace carelessly into his canvas duffel bag, alongside the stolen handbags. "Exactly. And the best part is, the crazy wife is locked in a dark hole right now. When she finally gets out, nobody will believe a word she says. Bradley will tell the cops she lost her mind and misplaced the jewelry herself. It is a victimless crime." I sat back in my leather chair inside the hidden vault, staring at the monitor with a cold, burning intensity. A victimless crime. He had just stolen well over $100,000 in documented heirlooms. In my state, stealing anything over $10,000 was classified as grand larceny, a severe felony carrying massive prison time. They thought they were being so clever. They thought they were stripping me down to nothing. But Jamal had just handed me the absolute perfect weapon. He had crossed the line from a domestic dispute into a major federal crime, and he had done it right in front of a high-definition lens. "Mommy, what is that man putting in his bag?" Leo asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. I reached out and gently stroked my son's cheek, a tight, merciless smile forming on my lips. "He is putting his own ticket to prison into that bag, Leo. Every single one of them is going to pay. And I am going to make sure they lose absolutely everything." The sharp chime of the front doorbell echoed through the house, momentarily interrupting the sounds of looting coming from the master bedroom upstairs. On the high-definition entryway monitor, I watched as Kelsey practically sprinted down the main hallway to answer it. She swung the heavy front door open to reveal a man standing on the porch. He looked entirely out of place in my affluent neighborhood. He wore a cheap, ill-fitting gray suit and carried a scuffed leather briefcase that looked like it had been dragged behind a car. He nervously glanced over his shoulder before stepping inside. "Come in. Come in," Kelsey urged, grabbing his sleeve and pulling him into the foyer, before quickly shutting and locking the door behind him. "Bradley," she called out toward the kitchen. "He is here. Bring the paperwork out to the dining room." Bradley hurried out of the living area, wiping a heavy bead of sweat from his forehead. He looked at the man with a volatile mixture of relief and intense anxiety. "Are you absolutely sure this is going to work?" Kelsey Bradley asked, his voice tight and trembling slightly. "If the bank figures out that stamp is fake or that the signature was forced, I am looking at serious federal charges. This is not just a little white lie to get a credit card." Kelsey rolled her eyes, clearly annoyed by his sudden lack of nerve, and turned to the man in the cheap suit. "Relax, Bradley. This is Greg. He is an actual registered notary public. The stamp is completely real and legally binding. He just happens to be very flexible about who is actually holding the pen when the ink hits the paper." "Right, Greg." Greg offered a greasy smile and set his battered briefcase on my pristine antique dining table. "For $5,000 in cash, I do not care if a ghost signs this deed." Greg said, his voice raspy and loud. "But we need to move fast. My license is on the line here, and you said the loan officer is showing up at 4 o'clock sharp. That gives us less than 2 hours to execute the property transfer, authorize the collateral, and get your stories completely straight." 2 hours. That was the incredibly tight timeline they were working against. Bradley was backed so far into a corner by his failing tech startup that he had arranged for a private bank executive to come directly to the house to finalize a $2 million emergency bridge loan. The only way the bank was going to hand over that kind of cash was if my historic estate, a property fully paid off and recently valued at over $3 million, was put up as the collateral. "I have been practicing her signature all week," Kelsey announced, proudly pulling a sleek blue folder from her designer tote bag. She walked over to the table, spreading the thick stack of legal documents across the polished mahogany. It is a simple loop on the N and a sharp cross on the T. I can forge it perfectly. Once Greg stamps it, the house officially belongs to your holding company, Bradley. Then we can sign the loan agreement the second the banker arrives. Bradley paced the length of the dining room, running his hands over his face in panic. What if Natalie starts screaming from the cellar while the bank guy is sitting right here in the living room? What if she bangs on the door? It is a solid oak door, but if she makes enough noise, he is going to ask questions. We cannot have a bank executive hearing a woman screaming for help. Diane strolled out of the kitchen, sipping the last of her champagne with an expression of pure icy indifference. "Let her scream," my mother-in-law said coldly. "We have the medical file right here on the counter. If anyone asks, we just explain that your poor sick wife is having a severe manic episode and had to be isolated for her own safety. We show them the fake doctor notes Kelsey got us. The banker only cares about the collateral and the signatures. He is a finance guy. He is not going to go down into a dark basement to check on a crazy woman." Down in the vault, I watched Kelsey pick up a luxury fountain pen. She leaned over the dining room table, carefully tracing her hand over the signature line of the property transfer deed. Greg stood right beside her, holding his official notary stamp ready to permanently validate a massive fraud. "Mommy, what is that bad lady writing?" Leo asked, pointing a small finger at the screen. "She is writing a confession, baby," I whispered, watching the ink hit the paper. They were so confident. They had thought of every twisted detail from the forged medical records to the corrupt notary. But as they committed blatant identity theft and wire fraud on crystal-clear video, they had no idea they were simply handing me all the ammunition I would ever need to destroy them. They were so confident. They had thought of every twisted detail from the forged medical records to the corrupt notary. But as they committed blatant identity theft and wire fraud on crystal-clear video, they had no idea they were simply handing me all the ammunition I would ever need to destroy them. I pulled my gaze away from the dining room monitor and looked down at the sleek, brushed steel control panel embedded into the antique desk. When I spent 2 years restoring this historic property, I did not just focus on preserving the original masonry and woodwork. I brought the entire infrastructure into the 21st century. Every single electrical circuit, climate control zone, and security deadbolt was hardwired into a central smart home mainframe. And the master override for that entire system was located right here deep inside the speakeasy vault, completely isolated from any external Wi-Fi networks Bradley could access. I was done being a spectator in my own home. It was time to start fighting back. I could not burst through the cellar door just yet. Jamal was too physically dangerous, and I needed to ensure the bank executive walked into a trap of their own making. But I could absolutely begin dismantling their sanity piece by piece. My fingers danced across the digital touchscreen. I brought up the environmental controls for the main floor. The screen displayed the current ambient temperature in the living room and dining room. It was a comfortable 72 degrees. "Let us see how well you forge my signature when your hands are slick with sweat," I whispered. I selected the primary HVAC zones covering the foyer, the dining room, and the grand living area. With a few swift taps, I completely disabled the air conditioning compressors. Then I activated the emergency radiant floor heating and cranked the forced air furnace up to its absolute maximum setting of 90 degrees. "Mommy, what are you doing?" Leo asked, peeking over the edge of the desk to look at the glowing green buttons. "I am just turning up the heat on the bad guys, baby," I replied, giving him a quick, reassuring smile. "They are going to get very uncomfortable very soon." Almost immediately, the heavy industrial furnace deep in the sub-basement roared to life. Through the monitors, I could not hear the rush of hot air, but I could instantly see the physical effects taking hold. The historic insulation of the house was impeccable. Without the air conditioning to circulate the cool drafts, the massive influx of heat began baking the main floor like an oversized convection oven. On the dining room feed, Greg the notary was the first to react. He reached up and aggressively loosened his cheap synthetic necktie, running a finger around his collar. "It is getting incredibly stuffy in here," Greg complained, his raspy voice carrying over the hidden microphones. "Can someone crack a window or turn on a fan? I cannot concentrate on these stamps if I am dripping sweat all over the paper." Bradley wiped his own forehead with the back of his hand, looking confused and irritated. "I do not know what is going on with the air. It was fine 5 minutes ago. This old house always has electrical glitches. Natalie usually handles the maintenance schedules." Kelsey let out a sharp, aggravated sigh. She was leaning over the table, still working on forging my initials on the supporting addendums, but her perfect facade was literally beginning to melt. "Well, figure it out, Bradley. My foundation is starting to run, and I am not greeting a high-level bank executive looking like I just ran a marathon. Go find the thermostat." Bradley practically jogged into the hallway, stopping in front of the digital thermostat mounted on the wall. I watched on the hallway camera as he angrily jabbed his fingers into the screen. He tapped it over and over again, his face turning red with frustration. "It is completely locked out," Bradley yelled back toward the dining room. "The screen is just flashing an error code. I cannot turn the heat off." Diane walked out of the living room, fanning her face vigorously with a decorative magazine she had pulled off the coffee table. "This is ridiculous, Bradley," she snapped, her tone dripping with its usual condescension, but now edged with genuine discomfort. "It feels like a sauna in here. Even the champagne in my glass is getting warm. Fix it right now. I refuse to sit in a boiling house while we wait for this banker." "I cannot fix it, Mom!" Bradley shouted, his stress levels visibly skyrocketing. "I do not know the master passcode for the smart hub. Natalie never gave it to me." Through the vault monitor, I smiled coldly. They had wanted my house so badly. Now they were trapped inside it, slowly roasting in the oppressive heat I was pumping through the vents. The psychological warfare had officially begun, and their perfect celebratory mood was rapidly disintegrating into sweaty, irritable panic. But making them sweat was only the first step. I shifted my attention back to the control panel, my eyes locking onto the security module for the second floor. It was time to deal with the thieves upstairs. I pulled up the detailed schematic for the second floor on the master touchscreen. The master bedroom was outfitted with a commercial-grade electronic security lock. I had originally installed it to protect my sensitive appraisal documents and high-value historical artifacts. Now it was going to serve as a high-tech prison cell. On the monitor, Jamal was just pulling the zipper closed on his heavy canvas duffel bag. Inside that bag was my late grandmother's platinum necklace, the vintage tennis bracelet, and over $100,000 worth of my personal property. Rebecca was pacing nervously near the large bay window, complaining loudly about how hot the room was suddenly getting. She wiped her sweating forehead and told Jamal they needed to get downstairs immediately before the bank executive arrived. Jamal slung the heavy bag over his massive shoulder and grunted in agreement. "Let us get out of here," he said, walking purposefully toward the heavy mahogany bedroom door. I hovered my finger over the bright red lock icon on my screen. Just as his large hand reached out to grasp the polished brass handle, I pressed the button. A sharp electronic beep echoed silently from the panel in the vault, followed instantly by the heavy metallic thud of the steel deadbolt sliding perfectly into place inside the doorframe. Jamal grabbed the door handle and twisted it. The brass knob turned freely, but the heavy wooden door did not budge an inch. He frowned deeply, pulling harder. "What is wrong with this stupid thing?" he muttered, rattling the handle violently. "It is stuck on something." Rebecca walked over, pushing his thick arm aside to try it herself. She jiggled the knob and pushed her shoulder forcefully against the wood. "It is not stuck, Jamal," she said, her voice rising in sudden, frantic panic. "It is completely locked. Did you push a button on the inside handle?" "I did not touch anything," Jamal snapped, dropping his stolen duffel bag heavily to the floor. He grabbed the handle with both hands, planted his boots firmly on the hardwood, and yanked with all his considerable strength. The solid oak frame groaned slightly under the intense pressure, but the commercial-grade deadbolt held firm. "Open the door!" Bradley. Jamal bellowed, his deep, booming voice easily penetrating the thick walls and echoing down the grand staircase to the main floor. Bradley, open this door right now. What kind of sick game are you playing? Downstairs on the dining room monitor, Bradley jumped out of his skin at the sound of Jamal shouting. He was already dripping with sweat from the furnace blasting forced air at 90 degrees. He practically sprinted out to the foyer, staring up the grand staircase with a look of absolute sheer panic. "Keep your voice down," Jamal Bradley hissed loudly up the stairs, desperately trying to keep things quiet. "The bank guy is going to be here any minute to sign the papers. Just bring the stuff and come downstairs." "I cannot come downstairs, you absolute idiot!" Jamal roared back, kicking the bottom of the antique door with his heavy leather work boot. The impact sounded like a bomb going off in the quiet, historic house. "You locked us in. Open this door right now before I smash it into a million pieces." Bradley looked completely bewildered and terrified. He wiped his dripping forehead and shouted back defensively, "I did not lock anything. I do not even have the key to that room. Natalie controls all the electronic locks from an app on her phone." Jamal let out a string of vicious, hateful curses. The oppressive heat in the room was clearly getting to him, and his paranoia, fueled by his own criminal nature, instantly took over. He spun around and glared fiercely at Rebecca. "Your brother is setting us up." Jamal spat angrily, pointing a thick finger at her face. "He wants me to pack up the diamonds and the designer bags, and now he is locking us in so he can call the cops and say we broke in. He gets the massive bank loan, he gets rid of his crazy wife, and he sends us to federal prison for the robbery. It is a total setup. No, Jamal Bradley would never do that to his own family." Rebecca pleaded, though. The growing doubt in her eyes was glaringly obvious on the camera feed. Jamal ignored her completely. He took 3 steps back, lowered his shoulder, and launched his massive frame directly into the center of my bedroom door. The wood splintered slightly around the heavy brass hinges, but the steel deadbolt did not give way. He kicked it again, roaring in absolute fury. Bradley Jamal screamed at the top of his lungs. "If you do not let me out of here right now, I am going to come down there and snap your neck in half." Down in the foyer, Bradley looked like he was on the verge of a total nervous collapse. The intense heat was suffocating him. His mistress was screaming about her melting makeup, his corrupt notary was demanding more cash, and his violent brother-in-law was actively trying to destroy the house. I sat back in my leather chair inside the cool, climate-controlled vault and smiled at Leo. The alliance of thieves was officially breaking. The alliance of thieves was officially breaking. Bradley paced at the bottom of the grand staircase, his hands pulling aggressively at his hair. He yelled up to Jamal that he was coming upstairs to check the electronic lock keypad. He took 2 heavy steps up the stairs, his breathing shallow and erratic in the suffocating heat of the house. In the dining room, Kelsey was aggressively fanning herself with a blank addendum document, complaining loudly that Bradley needed to hurry up and handle his psycho brother-in-law before the bank executive arrived. It was the perfect moment. They were distracted, agitated, and completely turning on each other. I leaned forward over the brushed steel control panel and tapped the icon for the whole home audio intercom system. When I upgraded the historic estate, I installed premium invisible ceiling speakers in every single room. They were meant for playing soft classical music during my appraisal dinner parties. Today, they were going to broadcast a documentary of utter betrayal. My fingers accessed the secure cloud storage drive on the monitor. I opened a folder labeled Security Intercepts and selected an audio file I had isolated exactly 3 weeks ago. I had captured it on the living room camera late at night while Bradley was taking a shower upstairs. Kelsey had poured herself a glass of my expensive wine, pulled out her phone, and made a very private call to a man whose voice I did not recognize. She felt completely safe in my house, entirely unaware that the high-definition microphones were recording every single syllable. I routed the audio file to play at maximum volume through every speaker in the house from the master bedroom to the kitchen. Then, I pressed play. A sharp electronic chime signaled the intercom activating, immediately followed by the crystal-clear sound of Kelsey's voice echoing off the mahogany walls. It was not her usual fake sugary tone. It was cold, calculating, and ruthless. "Do not worry about Bradley," Kelsey's recorded voice sneered loudly from the ceiling above them. "He is a complete, gullible idiot. He actually believes I love him and care about his pathetic tech startup. He is so desperate for this $2 million bank loan that he gave me full administrative access to the new corporate holding accounts." On the monitors, the reaction was instantaneous. Bradley froze mid-step on the staircase. His foot hovered above the third tread as the blood completely drained from his sweating face. In the dining room, Greg, the corrupt notary, stopped wiping his neck and stared up at the ceiling. Diane dropped her decorative magazine, her mouth falling open in sheer shock. Kelsey dropped the blank document she was using as a fan. Her eyes darted wildly around the room as her own voice continued to betray her from above. "As soon as that bank executive approves the collateral and the 2 million hits, the account, I am wiring every single cent of it to the offshore trust we set up the recording of." Kelsey laughed, a cruel, sharp sound that bounced off the dining room walls. "I am going to bleed him entirely dry. He forged the medical records and the property deed, so his name is all over the federal fraud. I will be on a flight out of the country before he even realizes the money is gone, and he will be sitting in a federal prison cell taking all the blame." The audio clip ended with a sharp click, leaving a heavy, ringing silence in its wake. The suffocating 90-degree heat in the house suddenly felt entirely secondary to the massive psychological bomb that had just detonated. Even upstairs, the violent thudding against the master bedroom door had completely stopped. Jamal and Rebecca had heard every single word of Kelsey's master plan through the bedroom speakers. The realization that there was never going to be any money for them, that Kelsey was planning to steal the entire $2 million loan and leave the whole family to face the federal fraud charges, hung in the air like thick, toxic smoke. Bradley slowly turned around on the stairs. His expensive dress shirt was completely soaked in sweat, clinging tightly to his chest. He looked down into the dining room where his beautiful young mistress was standing frozen in place. The illusion he had destroyed his marriage for was entirely shattered. The woman he had locked his wife and child in a dark cellar for was not a supportive partner trying to save his business. She was a professional parasite who had meticulously planned to destroy his life and steal his last remaining lifeline. Kelsey swallowed hard, her throat visibly bobbing on the camera feed. Her perfect foundation was melting, but now she was sweating from pure, unadulterated terror. "Bradley," she stammered, taking a small, trembling step backward toward the kitchen doorway. "Bradley, that is not what it sounds like. That is fake. Natalie must have used some kind of artificial intelligence program to fake my voice. You know she is crazy, Bradley. You know she is trying to tear us apart." But Bradley was not listening to her lies anymore. His hands clenched into tight, white-knuckled fists at his sides. The arrogance and entitlement that had fueled him all morning instantly morphed into an explosive, violent rage. He stepped off the staircase and began walking slowly and deliberately toward the dining room. He stepped off the staircase and began walking slowly and deliberately toward the dining room. The oppressive heat I was pumping through the vents seemed to radiate directly from his clenched jaw. Bradley reached the polished mahogany table and stared down at the thick stack of legal documents. He picked up the property transfer deed, the one Kelsey had just painstakingly forged my signature on. For a second, his hands shook violently, crinkling the expensive paper. Then he opened his fingers and let the document fall to the floor. The forged deed fluttered uselessly, landing near Kelsey's expensive designer heels. "An offshore trust," Kelsey Bradley said, his voice terrifyingly quiet compared to his earlier shouting. "You set up an offshore trust behind my back. That is what you were doing on your phone while I was sleeping in the next room." Kelsey took another step back, her back hitting the edge of the antique sideboard. "Bradley, you have to listen to me," she pleaded, though her voice lacked its usual smooth confidence. "That recording is manipulated. Natalie is a psychopath trying to ruin our future. She probably used artificial intelligence to sound exactly like me. She is trying to turn us against each other. Bradley let out a dark, humorless laugh that sounded more like a sharp bark. Nobody else knows about the specific bank routing protocols for the new holding company, Kelsey. Nobody else knew I was the one who physically forged the medical records. You are the only person I told about the sedative dosages. You were going to take the entire $2 million and leave me to rot in a federal cell while you drank cocktails on a beach. In the vault, Leo squeezed my hand. I smiled down at him watching the monitor as the grand house of cards officially collapsed. Seeing that her desperate lies were completely useless, a sudden and dramatic shift came over Kelsey. The sweet, innocent posture she had maintained all morning vanished instantly. She stood up straight, wiped a thick streak of melted foundation from her cheek, and glared at Bradley with absolute undisguised disgust. "You want the truth, Bradley?" Kelsey spat, her voice dripping with pure venom. "Fine. Yes, I was going to take the money. And you know exactly why. Because you are a pathetic, complete loser. Your tech startup is an absolute joke. You have burned through millions of dollars from your investors over the last 3 years, and you have absolutely nothing to show for it but a rented luxury office space and a mountain of debt you cannot pay." Bradley flinched as if she had physically slapped him across the face. His massive ego, the fragile foundation of his entire identity, was shattering in real time on my high-definition monitors. "You walk around acting like you are this brilliant, visionary tech CEO?" Kelsey continued mercilessly, her voice rising in volume to compete with the roaring furnace. "But you are just a weak, gullible mark. You could not even manage your own wife without my help. I had to be the one to drug her tea every night. I had to be the one to arrange the fake doctor and pay him off. I had to forge the signature on the deed right now because your hand was shaking too much to hold the pen. You are a complete coward, Bradley. You do not have the spine to do anything yourself." Diane let out a loud gasp from the doorway, her champagne glass slipping from her hand and shattering on the floor. "How dare you speak to my son that way, you little tramp? He left his marriage for you." Kelsey whipped her head around to face my mother-in-law, her eyes flashing with intense rage. "Oh, shut up, Diane. You are just as delusional as he is. You walk around this house acting like you own the place, looking down your nose at everyone. But you do not own a single brick of this estate. Your son is entirely broke. Natalie is the only one with any real money, and you were all too stupid to realize she was the only thing keeping you from ending up in a dirty trailer park." Bradley let out a raw, furious scream. He lunged forward, grabbing Kelsey by the shoulders and shoving her hard against the antique sideboard. The crystal glasses resting on top rattled loudly, a few tipping over and breaking on the hardwood. "I ruined my entire life for you," Bradley roared right into her face, spittle flying from his lips. "I locked my own kid in a freezing basement because you said it was the only way to get the capital. I committed federal fraud for you." Kelsey shoved him back with surprising strength, her perfectly manicured nails digging fiercely into his chest. "You did it because you are desperate and greedy, Bradley. Do not try to blame me for your own pathetic choices. You were going to lose everything anyway. I was just making sure I got paid for my wasted time." From my secure seat inside the Prohibition Vault, I watched the two scammers tear each other to absolute pieces. The oppressive 90-degree heat of the house was entirely mirroring the explosive pressure cooker of their toxic relationship. Every single word Kelsey screamed was another nail in Bradley's coffin. He had thrown away a faithful wife, a beautiful son, and a secure future, all for a woman who despised him and viewed him as nothing more than a convenient, automated teller machine. I leaned closer to the monitor, feeling a profound sense of satisfaction. The first phase of my retaliation was an overwhelming success, but the bank executive was still on his way. Suddenly, the tense standoff in the dining room erupted into absolute physical chaos. Diane had stood frozen near the arched doorway for entirely too long, listening to this young mistress tear down her golden child. The shock finally wore off, replaced instantly by the rabid, blind defense of a mother who refused to accept reality. Diane dropped all pretense of being a refined high society matriarch. She lunged across the dining room, her designer heels clicking loudly against the hardwood. Before Kelsey could even react or step away from Bradley, Diane raised her hand and delivered a vicious, echoing slap directly across Kelsey's face. The sound cracked through the hidden microphones like a whip. Kelsey stumbled backward, crying out in pain and clutching her reddened cheek. "You ungrateful little gold digger!" Diane shrieked, her face contorted into an ugly mask of pure rage. "How dare you speak to my son like that? He left his entire family for you. He put his neck on the line for you." Kelsey recovered her balance quickly, her own temper flaring into sudden violence. She did not back down. Instead, she lunged right back at my mother-in-law. Kelsey grabbed a fistful of Diane's expensive cashmere sweater and violently shoved the older woman against the heavy oak dining table. "Do not ever touch me, you delusional old bat!" Kelsey screamed, her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into Diane's shoulders. "Your son is a complete fraud, and you are just a pathetic enabler who leeches off her daughter-in-law because you do not have a single dime to your own name." The perfect family dynamic they had projected for years instantly dissolved into a trashy, humiliating brawl. Diane shrieked and reached up, grabbing a handful of Kelsey's blonde hair and pulling it hard. Kelsey shrieked back, swinging her free arm wildly. They knocked over a thick stack of the forged addendum documents, scattering the crisp, white pages all over the floor. The remaining crystal champagne flutes crashed to the ground, shattering into tiny, sparkling shards around their feet. Bradley stood there for a moment, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his rapidly collapsing life. The oppressive heat of the house was suffocating him, the betrayal of his mistress was absolute, and now his mother was wrestling with his lover over the forged paperwork of a house he did not even own. "Stop it!" Bradley finally yelled, grabbing his mother by the waist and desperately trying to pull her away. "Stop it right now, both of you. The bank executive is going to be here any minute." Diane ripped herself away from Kelsey's grip, breathing heavily, her pristine hair completely disheveled. She pointed a trembling finger at the younger woman, but kept her wild eyes locked on Bradley. "Kick her out, Bradley!" Diane demanded hysterically, her voice echoing loudly off the high ceilings. "Throw this trash out onto the street right now. We do not need her. We will sign the papers ourselves. We will get the notary to stamp them. This house rightfully belongs to you." Kelsey let out a sharp, mocking laugh, rubbing her stinging cheek. "You cannot do anything without me. You need my signature on the holding company documents, or the bank will not release a single cent." Diane ignored her, turning fully to her sweating, panicked son. "Listen to me, Bradley. You deserve every single brick of this estate. You put up with that cold, calculating woman for 9 miserable years. You endured her obsession with her career. You suffered through her constant belittling of your business ventures. This house is your payment for dealing with Natalie. It is your right. So what if you have to forge a few medical records? So what if you have to lock her in a basement for a few hours? She owes you this." I sat in the cool, dimly lit speakeasy vault, holding Leo's small hand tightly in my own. Hearing my mother-in-law openly justify locking me in a dark cellar simply because Bradley had graciously endured my financial support for nearly a decade was the ultimate vindication. She was completely unhinged. There was no moral boundary she would not cross to protect her son's fragile ego. Greg, the notary, who had been pressing his back against the wall to avoid the flying glass, finally decided he had seen enough. He snatched his battered leather briefcase off the table and started violently shoving his notary stamps inside. "I am done," Greg announced, his raspy voice trembling with a mix of heat exhaustion and legal terror. "This is a complete disaster. I am not risking a federal prison sentence for a family that cannot even stop assaulting each other for 5 minutes. Keep your money. I am leaving." He turned and marched quickly toward the foyer. But Kelsey was faster. She sprinted across the dining room, blocking his path to the front door with a look of pure desperation on her face. "You are not going anywhere," Kelsey threatened, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "You took the deposit. You are involved in this federal fraud now just as much as we are. If you walk out that door, I will personally ensure the authorities know exactly whose stamp is on those forged documents. Before Greg, the notary, could even respond to Kelsey's vicious threat, a deafening crash echoed from the second floor. It sounded like a massive tree had just fallen directly onto the roof of the historic estate. Everyone in the foyer froze, looking up toward the grand staircase. The heavy mahogany frame of the master bedroom door had finally splintered under the sheer brute force of my brother-in-law. On the vault monitors, I watched as Jamal kicked the broken pieces of wood out of his way, his massive chest heaving with exertion. He marched out into the upstairs hallway, the heavy canvas duffel bag slung securely over his wide shoulder. Rebecca hurried out right behind him, her face flushed red from the oppressive heat and her eyes wide with panic. Jamal did not walk down the stairs. He stomped down them, his heavy leather boots hitting the hardwood steps so hard the antique banister rattled. His dark face was shining with sweat and his expression was murderous. He had heard every single word of the intercepted audio recording playing through the ceiling speakers. He knew exactly what Kelsey had planned, and he realized the $2 million bank loan was nothing but a mirage that was going to land them all in federal prison. "Get out of my way!" Jamal bellowed as he reached the bottom of the staircase, glaring directly at Bradley. "I am leaving. This entire operation is a complete circus, and I am not sticking around to be the clown who takes the fall." Bradley stepped forward instinctively, blocking the pathway to the front door. His eyes darted nervously to the heavy canvas duffel bag slung over Jamal's shoulder. The intense 90-degree heat, combined with the catastrophic collapse of his relationship with Kelsey, had pushed Bradley into a state of total paranoid delirium. He pointed a shaking finger at the bag. "Where do you think you are going with that?" "Jamal," Bradley demanded, his voice cracking slightly. "You are trying to run off with the loot before the deal is even done. You heard Kelsey's recording, and now you are trying to cut your losses and rob me blind." Jamal let out a deep, rumbling laugh that held absolutely zero humor. "Rob you blind. You do not own any of this, Bradley. You are sitting here sweating like a pig while your fake notary tries to run away and your mistress plans her escape to an offshore island. I am simply taking my payment for services rendered." "Put the bag down," Bradley shouted, taking another aggressive step forward. "That is Natalie's vintage jewelry collection inside that bag. That is over $100,000 in diamonds and platinum. If you walk out the door with that, you are committing a massive felony. I am not letting you take the only valuable things left in this house while I am stuck here dealing with the bank and the fraud charges." Jamal dropped the duffel bag heavily onto the foyer floor. The sound of my stolen heirloom jewelry clanking against the hardwood echoed through the hidden microphones. Jamal squared his massive shoulders and stepped right up to Bradley, towering over my terrified husband. "You listen to me, you pathetic little man," Jamal growled, poking a thick finger hard into Bradley's chest. "You called me here. You begged me to come help you deal with your wife because you were too much of a coward to face her yourself. You promised me a cut of the loan. But there is no loan. There is only a massive federal trap that your little blonde girlfriend set up for you. I broke into that biometric safe upstairs, and I earned every single diamond inside it." Rebecca rushed down the last few stairs, grabbing Jamal's arm and trying to pull him back. "Jamal, please stop," she begged, tears streaming down her sweaty face. "Let us just leave the bag and go. If the police come, they are going to lock you up. We have to get out of here before the bank executive arrives." But Jamal shook her off violently. "I am not leaving empty-handed, Rebecca. I do not care about the bank executive. I do not care about your idiot brother. I am taking the bag and I am walking out the front door, and if anyone tries to stop me, I will break their jaw." Diane rushed into the foyer from the dining room, her hands flying to her mouth in sheer horror. "Jamal, you cannot steal from this family," she cried out. "We are supposed to be united. We are supposed to be taking this house together." Jamal sneered at my mother-in-law. "We are not family, Diane. We are just a bunch of scavengers picking over the bones of a house that none of us actually own." Bradley was completely losing his mind. He actually reached into his pocket and pulled out his cell phone. Put the bag down. Jamal Bradley threatened, his thumb hovering over the screen. I will call the police right now and report a robbery. I will tell them you broke into the house. The utter hypocrisy was astounding. My husband, who had literally locked his wife and child in a dark cellar to commit real estate fraud, was now threatening to call the police on his own brother-in-law for stealing. Down in the speakeasy vault, I watched the absolute destruction of their greedy little alliance. Bradley was right about one thing. Stealing that jewelry was a massive felony. But Bradley was entirely wrong about who was going to take the fall. I leaned back in my leather chair, letting the cool air of the vault wash over me. The trap was set perfectly, and they were all standing directly inside it, fighting over the cheese. Before Bradley could even press his thumb against the screen of his cell phone, Jamal closed the distance between them with terrifying speed. For a man of his massive size, he moved like a freight train. Jamal reached out with both hands and grabbed the collar of Bradley's sweat-soaked dress shirt. With a violent upward thrust, Jamal lifted my husband entirely off his feet. Bradley's expensive phone slipped from his trembling fingers, hitting the hardwood floor and shattering the glass screen. Are you going to call the cops on me, Bradley? Jamal roared, his face mere inches from my husband's terrified eyes. You think you can use me to do your dirty work and then throw me to the wolves? I will snap your neck before you can even dial a single number. Bradley gagged, his hands clawing uselessly at Jamal's thick wrists. His face was turning a dangerous shade of purple as the collar of his shirt cut into his throat. He kicked his legs in the air, completely powerless against the brute strength of the man he had foolishly brought into my home to intimidate me. Diane let out a blood-curdling shriek. She threw herself at Jamal, her manicured hands slapping wildly at his broad back and thick arms. Let him go, Diane screamed hysterically. You are killing my son. Let him go right now, you animal. But Jamal did not even flinch. It was Rebecca who finally snapped. The years of watching her mother worship Bradley while treating her like a secondary citizen finally boiled over in the suffocating 90-degree heat of the house. Rebecca lunged forward, grabbing her mother by the shoulders and violently ripping her away from Jamal. Diane stumbled backward, her heels slipping on the polished wood. She stared at her daughter in absolute shock. Diane gasped, clutching her chest. What are you doing? Help your brother! No, Rebecca screamed back, her voice raw and tearing at her throat. I am done helping him, Mom. I am done watching you protect him while he destroys everything he touches. He promised us a massive payout. He promised Jamal a cut of the $2 million bank loan. But there is no loan. His mistress was going to steal the entire thing and leave us all to go to federal prison. Bradley is a complete failure and you are just too blind to see it. How dare you? Diane shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at Rebecca. He is a visionary. He just needs this capital. He is a fraud, Rebecca yelled, tears streaming down her face, cutting through the heavy layer of sweat. He is a fraud, and you are a fool. We broke into a safe today, Mom. We committed a massive felony for a man who does not even own the house we are standing in. The living room and foyer had officially devolved into a full-scale war zone. Jamal was shaking Bradley like a rag doll, roaring insults into his face. Rebecca and Diane were engaged in a vicious screaming match, airing decades of toxic family grievances at the top of their lungs. The noise level was deafening, echoing off the historic masonry and carrying right down into the hidden microphones of my speakeasy vault. Through all this absolute chaos, I kept my eyes scanning the other monitors. My gaze locked onto the dining room feed. Kelsey was standing completely still, watching the violent melee unfolding in the foyer. She realized instantly that the entire operation had imploded. There was no way to get the signature, no way to fool the bank executive, and no way to get her hands on the money. Survival instinct kicked in. Kelsey quietly reached down and scooped up the thick blue folder containing the forged property transfer deed and the fake medical records. She shoved them roughly into her designer tote bag. If the authorities got involved, those documents were her guaranteed ticket to federal prison. She needed to destroy the evidence. Kelsey slipped out of her high heels, holding them in one hand so her footsteps would be entirely silent on the hardwood. She hugged the wall, slowly creeping toward the heavy front door while the family tore each other apart just a few feet away. Down in the vault, Leo sat forward in his oversized leather chair, his eyes wide with absolute awe. "Mommy," he whispered, pointing at the glowing screens. "They are beating each other up. You did not even touch them, and they are fighting." I reached out and gently smoothed his hair. "When bad people run out of victims, Leo, they always turn on themselves. They are locked in a cage of their own making." Kelsey reached the heavy front door. Her hands were shaking violently as she reached for the brass deadbolt. She just needed to turn it slip out into the afternoon air and run to her car before anyone noticed she was missing. But as her fingers gripped the lock, a sleek black luxury sedan slowly pulled into my long, circular driveway, clearly visible on the exterior security camera. The final guest had just arrived. The final guest had just arrived. The crisp, melodic chime of the front doorbell cut through the deafening screams and the suffocating 90-degree heat like a sharp blade. It rang a second time, echoing off the mahogany walls of the foyer. Instantly, the violent melee froze. Jamal stopped shaking Bradley, his massive hands still gripping my husband's torn dress shirt. Diane and Rebecca fell completely silent, their chests heaving as they stared at the heavy wooden door. Kelsey froze with her hand hovering just inches from the brass deadbolt, her designer tote bag clutched tightly against her side. "He is here," Bradley gasped, his voice barely a raspy whisper as he struggled to breathe. "The bank executive is here." The sheer desperation in Bradley's eyes completely overrode his fear of Jamal and his rage toward Kelsey. That $2 million loan was the only thing standing between him and absolute financial ruin. He frantically slapped Jamal's hands away and dropped to the hardwood floor, scrambling to his feet. "Hide the bag," Bradley hissed, pointing wildly at the heavy canvas duffel bag sitting in the middle of the foyer. "Jamal moved that bag right now. If he sees stolen diamonds sitting in the entryway, the deal is completely dead." Jamal hesitated, his eyes narrowing, but the prospect of the massive bank loan still held a sliver of greedy temptation. He bent down, scooped up the heavy duffel bag, and shoved it roughly behind the large antique velvet sofa in the living room, completely out of sight from the front door. Bradley was in a state of absolute manic panic. He desperately tried to fix his appearance, but it was a completely lost cause. His expensive dress shirt was torn at the collar from Jamal's massive grip. His hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, and his face was flushed a dangerous shade of crimson from the oppressive heat I was pumping through the vents. He hastily tucked his ripped shirt into his trousers and wiped his face with his sleeve. He turned his wild eyes toward his mistress. "Kelsey, get back in the dining room right now," Bradley ordered, his voice trembling with a terrifying edge. "Put the forged documents back on the table. You are going to smile, you are going to act like the loving, supportive partner, and you are going to help me close this loan. If you try to run out that front door, I swear I will tell this banker exactly what you planned with that offshore trust." Kelsey looked at the front door, then back at Bradley. She knew she was trapped. If the deal fell apart now, she walked away with absolutely nothing but a massive target on her back. She swallowed hard, forced a stiff, terrified smile onto her melting face, and walked quickly back to the dining room. She pulled the thick blue folder out of her tote bag and spread the forged property transfer deed across the polished table. Greg, the notary, was still standing near the hallway, clutching his battered briefcase. Bradley pointed a shaking finger at him. "Sit down and get your stamps ready," Bradley commanded. "You are getting paid your $5,000 in cash as soon as the ink dries. Do not ruin this for me." Greg wiped the sweat from his neck and nervously sat back down in the antique dining chair. Diane frantically tried to smooth her disheveled hair, fixing her cashmere sweater, and pasting on a fake aristocratic smile that looked entirely deranged given her flushed red face. Rebecca stood silently near the staircase, looking completely defeated and terrified. "Just act normal," Bradley pleaded to the room, though nothing about the situation was remotely normal. The house felt like a literal oven. The floor was covered in shattered crystal champagne flutes and scattered addendum papers. The master bedroom door upstairs was completely smashed to pieces, and the family standing in the foyer looked like they had just survived a street fight. Bradley took a deep, shaky breath, wiped his sweating palms on his trousers, and reached for the brass handle. He pulled the heavy front door open, forcing the widest and most fake smile I had ever seen onto his face. Mr. Henderson Bradley greeted loudly, his voice cracking slightly, as he addressed the man standing on the porch. "Welcome to our home. I am so sorry for the heat. Our historic climate control system is experiencing a slight malfunction today, but please come in. We have all the paperwork ready for you." Down in the speakeasy vault, I reached under the desk and pulled out a thick manila folder I had retrieved from my biometric wall safe earlier that morning. I looked down at Leo, who was watching the monitors with rapt attention. "Are we going out there now?" Mommy, Leo asked quietly. I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored dress. "Yes, baby. It is time to go introduce ourselves to the guests." I stood up, smoothing the front of my tailored dress. "Yes, baby. It is time to go introduce ourselves to the guests." I took Leo's small hand in mine and led him away from the monitors. We walked to the far side of the speakeasy vault, opposite the heavy stone door that opened into the cellar. When I restored this property, I had discovered that the original owner, a wealthy bootlegger, had built a secondary escape route. Behind a panel of dark mahogany was a narrow, hidden staircase that led directly up to the main floor opening right into the expansive library adjacent to the living room. It was an architectural secret that had remained perfectly hidden for nearly a century. I pressed the concealed lever, and the heavy wood panel clicked open. The narrow staircase was dimly lit but perfectly clean. We walked up the wooden steps quietly. As we reached the top landing, I could hear the muffled voices coming from the living room just on the other side of the wall. Bradley was talking fast, his voice overly enthusiastic and strained. "As you can see, Mr. Henderson, the property is in immaculate condition. It was fully restored a few years ago. We are very eager to finalize the collateral agreement today so we can move forward with the tech expansion." A deep professional voice answered him. "The location is certainly prime real estate, Bradley. But I must say it is incredibly warm in here. Are you sure the climate control is the only issue? Everyone seems quite agitated." I leaned closer to the wall, listening intently. Kelsey chimed in, her voice attempting to sound sweet, but vibrating with barely suppressed panic. "Oh, we are just so excited about the business prospects, Mr. Henderson. It has been a very busy morning. We have all the necessary paperwork right here on the coffee table. The property transfer deed has been fully notarized as of 10 minutes ago." I could hear the rustle of heavy paper as Bradley presumably handed over the forged documents. "Excellent," the bank executive said. "Let me just review these signatures and we can move forward with the authorization." I looked down at Leo. He was staring up at me, completely silent and remarkably brave. I gave his hand a gentle squeeze. I took a deep breath, letting the cool, filtered air of the hidden staircase fill my lungs one last time before stepping out into the suffocating heat of the house. I reached out and unlatched the heavy, customized locking mechanism. In the living room, the massive floor-to-ceiling oak bookshelves suddenly let out a low, mechanical hum. Bradley froze mid-sentence. Mr. Henderson looked up from the forged documents. Diane, who was sitting stiffly on the velvet sofa, attempting to look elegant despite her sweat-soaked cashmere, let out a sharp gasp. The entire section of the library wall slowly slid open on concealed tracks, revealing the hidden passage. I stepped out from behind the bookshelves, holding Leo's hand. I was wearing my sharpest tailored appraisal suit, perfectly pressed and completely spotless. Not a single hair was out of place. I looked absolutely immaculate, completely composed, and entirely out of place in the sweltering, chaotic mess my family had created in my home. The reaction was instantaneous and explosive. Diane let out a blood-curdling scream, dropping her empty crystal glass onto the Persian rug. Rebecca, who was standing near the archway, backed up until she hit the wall, her eyes wide with absolute horror. Jamal poked his head out from the dining room, his jaw dropping open as he stared at me as if I were a literal ghost. Kelsey staggered backward, knocking her knee against the heavy oak coffee table. She clutched her chest, her face turning an ashen gray underneath her melted makeup. How Kelsey gasped, her voice barely a squeak. "How did you get out of the cellar?" But it was Bradley's reaction that was the most satisfying. The sheer, unadulterated terror that washed over his face was something I will never forget. His eyes darted from me to the heavy oak bookshelves and back to me. His mind could not process what he was seeing. He had personally locked the heavy iron deadbolt on the cellar door. He had stood there and demanded my surrender. And now I was standing in the middle of the living room looking like I had just arrived from a high-end corporate meeting. Natalie Bradley choked out, his voice cracking violently. "What are you doing up here?" I smiled, a cold, empty expression that did not reach my eyes. I walked calmly toward the center of the living room, my heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. "I live here, Bradley," I said, my voice perfectly steady and clear. "The real question is, what are all of you doing in my house?" Mr. Henderson, the man sitting in the antique armchair holding the forged property deed, slowly lowered the paperwork. He looked at me, then looked at the terrified, sweating faces of my family. "Bradley," Mr. Henderson said, his deep voice carrying a sudden, sharp authority. "I thought you said your wife was currently confined to a medical facility for a severe psychiatric breakdown." Bradley opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was completely trapped in a lie so massive it was crushing him alive. The psychological warfare was over. It was time for the execution. Bradley opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He was completely trapped in a lie so massive it was crushing him alive. The psychological warfare was over. It was time for the execution. But instead of surrendering gracefully, Bradley's deeply ingrained narcissism triggered one final desperate survival mechanism. He physically shook his head, as if trying to clear the terrifying reality from his brain, and then he launched into the most pathetic performance I had ever witnessed in my entire life. Bradley practically threw himself across the heavy oak coffee table, rushing toward Mr. Henderson. He positioned his sweat-soaked body between the bank executive and me, raising his hands in a frantic, placating gesture. "Mr. Henderson, please do not be alarmed," Bradley stammered, his voice dropping into a loud, frantic whisper that echoed perfectly in the quiet room. "This is exactly what I was talking about. My wife has severe early-onset dementia. She suffers from extreme paranoid delusions. We had to set up a secure medical care room for her upstairs for her own safety, and she must have somehow broken the heavy lock on the door. She thinks she is still working as an appraiser. It is a tragedy, Mr. Henderson, an absolute tragedy." I stood perfectly still, keeping a firm grip on Leo's hand. My 8-year-old son did not flinch or cry. He stood tall beside me, watching his father lie through his teeth, knowing completely that his mother was in absolute control of the room. I watched Bradley spin this absurd, disgusting web of lies. He was literally sweating through his expensive, tailored trousers. His dress shirt was torn completely open at the collar from Jamal's violent grip, and he smelled like pure fear and stale alcohol. Yet he was pointing at me, the only person in the entire house who was not dripping with sweat and covered in shattered glass, calling me the insane one. Diane, who had been completely paralyzed by shock just seconds ago, instantly recognized the narrative Bradley was desperately trying to build. With years of practice as the ultimate enabler, she immediately snapped into her role. Diane let out a loud, theatrical sob that sounded completely ridiculous over the roaring of the furnace. She buried her face in her hands, forcing fake tears to spill over her flushed, sweaty cheeks. "Oh, my poor, sweet Natalie." Diane wailed loudly, stepping forward and reaching her arms out toward me as if I were a confused child wandering into dangerous traffic. "You are having another one of your terrible episodes, dear. We told you to stay in your room where it is safe and cool. You are confusing the nice bank man with your old clients. Come with me right now before you hurt yourself or the baby." Rebecca took her cue as well. She pushed herself off the hallway wall, wiping her own sweaty face, and rushed toward me from the opposite side. "Let her go, Mom," Rebecca said, her voice shaking with entirely manufactured concern. "I will help you get her back upstairs to her medical bed. We just need to get her sedated so she can rest." They closed in on me like two desperate vultures. Diane grabbed my left forearm, her perfectly manicured nails digging sharply into the expensive silk sleeve of my pristine suit jacket. Rebecca grabbed my right shoulder, attempting to physically pull me backward toward the foyer. They were trying to manhandle me right out of my own living room so Bradley could finish stealing my massive property. I did not scream. I did not thrash around or fight them. That is exactly what a person having a manic episode would do, and I absolutely refused to give Bradley even a single shred of credibility. Instead, I simply planted my heels firmly on the hardwood floor. I turned my head slowly, locking my eyes directly onto Diane's fake tear-stained face. The temperature in the room was boiling, but my glare was absolute ice. "Take your hands off me, Diane," I said. My voice was not loud, but the absolute razor-sharp authority in it made my mother-in-law freeze instantly. "You are sweating all over my silk lining, and if you do not step back right this second, I will add physical assault to the very long list of federal charges you are already facing today." Diane gasped loudly, instantly dropping my arm as if the dark fabric of my jacket had literally burned her fingers. She stumbled backward, bumping heavily into Rebecca, who also immediately let go of my shoulder. They were bullies and cowards at their core. They only attacked when they thought their victim was weak and heavily sedated. Faced with absolute unyielding strength, they immediately folded. I calmly adjusted the sleeves of my suit jacket, smoothing out the minor wrinkles they had caused. I stepped right around Bradley, completely ignoring his frantic, pathetic presence, and walked directly toward the bank executive sitting quietly in the antique armchair. "I am so sorry for this ridiculous interruption, Mr. Henderson," I said clearly, keeping my tone perfectly professional and polite. "As you can clearly see, my husband and his family are currently experiencing a severe collective breakdown. It seems the intense heat in this house has completely melted whatever small amount of sanity they had left." Bradley spun around, his eyes wide with wild animal panic. "Do not listen to her," he shouted frantically at the bank executive. "She does not know what she is saying. Look at the medical files Kelsey gave you. The doctor signed them. They're signed. She is completely delusional." Mr. Henderson looked down at the forged documents resting on his lap. He slowly closed the thick blue folder, resting his large hands firmly on top of it. He looked up at Bradley, then shifted his gaze to Kelsey, who was still cowering near the dining room table. Finally, his sharp eyes landed squarely on me. "I assure you, Bradley, I am not delusional," I said smoothly, a tight smile forming on my lips. "But you are about to wish you were, because the reality of what is about to happen to you next is going to be incredibly difficult to process." I immediately stepped up to the heavy oak coffee table, completely ignoring my husband's frantic sputtering. Bradley tried to step in front of me again, but I shot him a look so filled with absolute cold authority that he instinctively backed away. His entire posture collapsed under the weight of his crumbling lies. I gently laid the thick manila folder I brought from the vault directly onto the polished wood right next to the fraudulent blue folder Kelsey prepared. "Mr. Henderson," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level, "I sincerely apologize that you were dragged into this sweltering house under false pretenses. The desperate man standing sweating before you did not bring you here to finalize a legitimate corporate loan. He brought you here to make you an unwitting accomplice in a massive federal fraud." Bradley let out a strangled gasp. "Shut up, Natalie," he hissed, looking frantically between me and the executive. "Mr. Henderson, do not listen to a word she says. She is legally incompetent. Look at the deed we gave you. The property is mine. I calmly flipped open my manila folder. I pulled out a stack of crisp, watermarked legal documents that looked entirely different from the cheap printed papers Kelsey had forged. I slid them across the table toward Mr. Henderson. That piece of paper my husband just gave you is entirely worthless, I explained. Kelsey did a remarkably good job forging my signature. I watched her carefully do it on my hidden security cameras 20 minutes ago. But even if my signature was genuine, it would not matter. Because I actually do not own this house. The entire room fell into a dead silence. The only sound was the roaring furnace pumping out 90-degree heat. Bradley stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. Diane and Rebecca exchanged confused, terrified glances. "What are you talking about?" Bradley whispered, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Your name is on the deed. I saw it." "You bought this house before we got married." "I did buy this house, Bradley," I replied. "But you were always too lazy to actually read the financial disclosures. I am an expert in historic real estate preservation. Do you honestly think I would leave a $3 million asset unprotected?" 9 years ago, exactly 3 months before our wedding, I transferred the title of this estate, along with all my personal investment accounts, into a secure, irrevocable trust. Kelsey let out a sharp gasp, her hands flying to her mouth as the legal reality slammed into her. She worked in finance. She knew exactly what an irrevocable trust meant. "That is right, Kelsey," I said, locking my eyes onto his trembling mistress. "I am merely the primary beneficiary and the managing trustee. But the trust itself is a separate legal entity. I cannot just sign the house over to a tech holding company on a whim, and I certainly cannot do it with a single forged signature on a residential transfer deed. Dissolving or borrowing against this trust requires 2 independent corporate attorneys, a federally registered medallion signature guarantee, and months of rigorous legal filings." Bradley looked like he was about to vomit. The blood completely drained from his flushed face, leaving him looking sickly and pale. He stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the velvet sofa, and collapsed heavily onto the cushions. "Your name is on absolutely nothing, Bradley," I stated loudly. "You own 0% of this estate. You have zero equity in my business. You have absolutely no legal authority to use this property as collateral. You locked your own wife and child in a freezing cellar to steal something that was legally impossible for you to take." Jamal stepped out from the dining room archway, his eyes wide with unadulterated shock. He looked at Bradley, who was sitting on the sofa completely broken. "You mean we did all of this for nothing?" Jamal growled, his deep voice heavily vibrating with dangerous anger. "You dragged me into a massive felony robbery, and you do not even have the collateral to get the loan." Bradley suddenly shot up from the sofa, his desperation completely overriding his logic. "Mr. Henderson," Bradley pleaded wildly, turning to the man in the armchair, "there absolutely has to be a way around this. I can give you personal guarantees. I can sign over the tech company shares. You cannot just leave without funding the loan." Mr. Henderson slowly closed my manila folder. He reached up and calmly adjusted his tie. He absolutely did not look like a friendly bank executive anymore. The professional customer service smile completely vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, hard stare that sent a sudden chill through the sweltering room. The professional customer service smile completely vanished from his face, replaced by a cold, hard stare that sent a sudden chill through the sweltering room. Bradley leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the coffee table. "You do not understand," he yelled, his voice cracking with sheer desperation. "The bank does not care about some old trust document. I am the CEO of a major tech firm. I have liquid assets. I can sign a personal promissory note right now. Just give me the loan papers. We can bypass the property collateral entirely. I need that $2 million wired into my corporate account today, or my entire company goes under." Mr. Henderson did not reach for any loan papers. Instead, he slowly and methodically closed his leather briefcase. The metallic snap of the brass latches sounded like a judge bringing down a heavy wooden gavel. He stood up, brushing a speck of invisible dust from his perfectly pressed suit. He looked down at my husband with an expression of pure professional disgust. Mr. Henderson Bradley pleaded, his voice dropping into a pathetic, terrified whine. Please, I will give you a personal cut of the loan, 10%. Just process the approval and walk away. I think you have said enough, Bradley, the man said, his deep voice cutting effortlessly through the ambient noise of the roaring furnace. You are currently attempting to bribe a federal officer while openly admitting to a conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. Bradley froze. The entire room seemed to stop breathing. Diane let out a small, confused whimper from the sofa. The man reached into the inside breast pocket of his suit jacket. He did not pull out a business card or a bank pamphlet. He pulled out a dark leather wallet and flipped it open with a flick of his wrist. A heavy gold shield caught the light reflecting brightly in the dim living room. My name is Special Agent Henderson, he announced, his voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. I am with the Federal Bureau of Investigation Financial Crimes Division, and I am absolutely not here to approve a bridge loan for your non-existent tech startup. Bradley stared at the gold badge as if it were a venomous snake preparing to strike. His knees gave out completely and he collapsed back onto the velvet sofa, his mouth hanging open in silent, paralyzing terror. Kelsey let out a piercing, frantic scream. She spun around and sprinted toward the dining room archway, but she tripped over her own designer tote bag. She crashed hard onto the floor, sending the forged property deed and the fake medical records sliding across the polished hardwood directly to the feet of the federal agent. Agent Henderson looked down at the scattered papers and then looked directly at me. Thank you for your continued cooperation, Natalie, he said politely. The financial ledgers you provided us 3 weeks ago were incredibly thorough. We have been building this federal case ever since. Bradley slowly turned his head to look at me, his eyes wide and completely bloodshot. Ledgers, he whispered hoarsely. What ledgers? I stepped forward, looking down at the pathetic man who had tried to destroy my life. Did you honestly think I did not know what you were doing? I asked coldly. You left your laptop open on my kitchen counter a month ago. You were so arrogant you did not even bother to use a secure password. I saw the hidden spreadsheets. I saw the fake vendor invoices you and Kelsey were using to siphon money out of your investors' accounts. I saw the massive offshore wire transfers. You were not running a tech company, Bradley. You were running a highly illegal money laundering operation. I did not just sit in the dark and cry. I continued, my voice rising with righteous fury. I compiled every single document. I copied every email. I downloaded every encrypted ledger. And then I sent the entire package directly to the authorities. They have been monitoring your communications for weeks. They knew exactly when you scheduled this fake bank appointment because they were the ones who intercepted the request and sent Agent Henderson in his place. Diane let out a loud, dramatic wail, clutching her chest as if she were having a sudden heart attack. My son is a legitimate businessman, she shrieked at the agent. He is a visionary. This is a massive misunderstanding. She set him up because she is jealous of his success. Ma'am, I suggest you remain completely quiet, Agent Henderson said firmly, not even glancing at my hysterical mother-in-law. Your son is facing multiple federal indictments, including wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, and money laundering. And based on what I just witnessed regarding those forged medical documents and the attempt to unlawfully confine his wife, we will be adding several more severe felony charges to that list. Jamal, who had been standing near the foyer, suddenly realized the absolute gravity of the situation. He was standing in a room with a federal agent, while a canvas duffel bag filled with over $100,000 in stolen diamonds sat just feet away behind the sofa. He took a slow, terrified step backward toward the front door, trying to seamlessly blend into the shadows. Kelsey was frantically crawling on the floor, trying to gather the forged papers. I did not do it, she sobbed, her makeup smearing across her face in ugly dark streaks. Bradley made me do it. He threatened me. I am a victim here. Agent Henderson reached to his belt and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. "Nobody in this room is a victim, except for the woman standing over there holding her child," he said coldly. "The operation is officially over." As soon as those words left his mouth, the piercing wail of police sirens shattered the heavy silence of the neighborhood. The sound grew deafeningly loud in a matter of seconds. Through the large bay windows of the living room, I could see the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the perfectly manicured lawn. 3 local police cruisers and a dark, unmarked federal SUV pulled aggressively into my long circular driveway, completely blocking the exit. The trap I had spent 3 agonizing weeks building was finally snapping shut, and there was absolutely no way out for any of them. Bradley did not move. He was completely paralyzed on the velvet sofa. His chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow breaths as the reality of his situation crushed whatever was left of his massive ego. He was not just a failed tech entrepreneur anymore. He was not just bankrupt and publicly humiliated. He was a federal criminal. The wire fraud, the attempted identity theft, the forged medical records, and the unlawful imprisonment of his own family were all stacking up to guarantee he would spend the next 15 years of his life in a concrete cell. The heavy oak front door swung open violently. 5 uniformed police officers stepped into the sweltering foyer, their hands resting firmly on their duty belts. Agent Henderson gave them a curt nod and pointed directly toward the dining room, where Kelsey was still crawling on the polished hardwood floor. "Secure the female suspect first," Agent Henderson commanded. "She is considered a flight risk and a primary conspirator in the financial fraud." 2 large officers quickly closed the distance and grabbed Kelsey by her arms, lifting her effortlessly to her feet. Kelsey let out an ear-piercing shriek that echoed off the historic masonry. She thrashed wildly, kicking her expensive designer heels at the officer's shins. "Get your hands off me!" she screamed, her face entirely ruined by sweat and running makeup. "I did not do anything wrong. It was all him. Bradley forced me to forge those documents. He is a monster. He locked his own wife in the basement. I am just a consultant. You cannot arrest me for his crimes." Agent Henderson stepped forward, pulling her arms forcefully behind her back. The sharp, metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping into place over her wrists sounded like pure justice. "You are not a consultant, Kelsey," he said, his voice devoid of any sympathy. "You are the registered co-signer on an offshore account containing stolen investor funds. You have been under federal surveillance for nearly a month. You have the right to remain silent, and I highly suggest you start using it immediately before you add resisting arrest to your long list of felony charges." Kelsey sobbed hysterically as the officers dragged her toward the front door. She twisted her head back, glaring at Bradley with pure, absolute hatred. "Do something, you pathetic loser," she screamed at him. "Tell them it was your idea. Tell them you made me do it." But Bradley could not even look at her. He just stared blankly at the shattered crystal on the floor, completely broken and empty. The woman he had destroyed his marriage for was now screaming insults at him while being hauled away by the police. Diane watched the police officers haul the screaming mistress out of her son's house, and she completely lost whatever fragile grip she had on reality. She ran over to Bradley, throwing her arms around his neck and sobbing loudly. "You cannot take my son," she wailed at Agent Henderson. "He is a good man. He just needed the money to save his business. Natalie drove him to this. She is a terrible wife who refused to support his dreams. He is the real victim here." Agent Henderson looked at my mother-in-law with intense disgust. "Mom, stepping away from the suspect right now would be in your best interest," he warned her. A female officer approached and gently but firmly pulled Diane away from the sofa. Diane collapsed onto the floor, weeping uncontrollably as 2 other officers approached Bradley. They flanked him on both sides, leaving him absolutely no room to move or escape. "Stand up, Bradley," Agent Henderson ordered. Bradley slowly raised his head. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. His face was ghostly pale, completely devoid of the arrogant smirk he wore when he locked the cellar door just an hour ago. He weakly put his hands behind his back without putting up any fight at all. The heavy steel cuffs locked around his wrists with a definitive click. The sound brought an incredible wave of relief over my entire body. As the officers pulled Bradley to his feet, he finally looked over at me. His eyes were wide and filled with a pathetic, desperate plea for mercy. "Natalie, please," he whispered, his voice breaking into a pathetic sob. "I am your husband. I am the father of your child. You cannot let them do this to me. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. We can fix this. Please, Natalie." I stood perfectly straight, keeping my hand resting reassuringly on Leo's shoulder. I looked at the man who had systematically tried to destroy my sanity, steal my hard-earned wealth, and trap me in the dark. I did not feel an ounce of pity. "You stopped being my husband the moment you poisoned my tea," I said coldly. "And you stopped being a father the moment you locked your terrified son in a freezing cellar just to fund your own greed. Enjoy your new concrete home, Bradley. It is the only real estate you will ever truly own." The officers turned him around and marched him toward the door. The mastermind behind the entire pathetic operation was leaving in chains, completely stripped of his dignity, his freedom, and his stolen future. But the arrests were not quite finished yet. There was still the matter of my stolen heirloom jewelry and the violent thief standing nervously in the foyer. While the officers were occupied with marching my disgraced husband out the front door, Jamal thought he saw a window of opportunity. He was a man who had survived his entire life by knowing exactly when to cut his losses and run. He slowly backed away from the center of the foyer, his heavy boots making incredibly soft sounds against the hardwood. He was edging his massive frame toward the arched hallway that led to the back terrace, hoping to quietly slip out the rear exit and disappear into the neighborhood before anyone realized he was part of the conspiracy. I kept my eyes locked on him. Jamal reached the edge of the hallway, his hand brushing against the antique wallpaper. He took one final look over his shoulder, his eyes darting toward the velvet sofa where he had hidden his canvas duffel bag just minutes earlier. Greed is a very difficult disease to cure. He was clearly debating whether he had enough time to grab the bag of diamonds before he ran. That brief moment of hesitation was all it took. "Excuse me, officers!" I called out, my voice ringing clearly across the large room. The remaining two police officers and Agent Henderson immediately turned their attention back to me. I pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my brother-in-law, who froze like a deer caught in the headlights. "The man trying to sneak out the back door is Jamal," I stated calmly. "And I would like to officially press charges against him for breaking and entering, destruction of property, and grand larceny." Jamal let out a low, dangerous growl. "You are crazy," he barked, raising his large hands defensively, as the two police officers immediately stepped toward him, blocking his path to the hallway. "I did not do anything. I was just here for a family dinner. I have nothing to do with Bradley and his bank fraud. Ask my wife." Rebecca, who was still standing near the staircase, looked absolutely terrified. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. She knew exactly what Jamal had done upstairs, and the oppressive heat of the room was suddenly completely forgotten, replaced by the freezing chill of impending doom. "He is right about the bank fraud," I told Agent Henderson, walking slowly toward the center of the living room. "Jamal is not smart enough to orchestrate a federal wire scheme, but he is a very experienced thief. While Bradley was trying to steal my house, Jamal was upstairs using a titanium pry bar to smash open my biometric wall safe." Jamal took a step back, his broad chest heaving. "You have no proof of that," he sneered, though the sweat pouring down his face betrayed his sheer panic. "You cannot just accuse people of stealing without evidence. You are just mad because your family is falling apart." I smiled coldly. I looked directly at the large antique velvet sofa. "Officer, if you look right behind that sofa, you will find a heavy canvas duffel bag. Jamal hid it there right before you arrived." One of the police officers walked over to the sofa and leaned over the backrest. He reached down and pulled up the heavy canvas bag Jamal had been carrying earlier. The officer unzipped the main compartment and looked inside. He let out a low whistle of surprise. "What is in the bag?" Officer Agent Henderson asked, walking over to inspect it himself. The officer reached inside and pulled out a handful of my designer leather handbags. Then he reached deeper and pulled out my late grandmother's platinum necklace, the 3-carat diamond center stone catching the dim light of the living room. Next came the vintage tennis bracelet and the matching drop earrings. The sheer volume of wealth dangling from the officer's hand was undeniable. "Those are family heirlooms," I stated clearly, my voice echoing in the silent room. They were securely locked in a safe inside my master bedroom. The total appraised value of the items inside that bag is well over $100,000. In this state, that immediately qualifies as grand larceny. And since I have high-definition security footage of Jamal violently prying open the safe and stuffing those exact items into that bag, I believe you have everything you need to make the arrest. Jamal realized it was completely over. The evidence was literally in the hands of the police and his exit was entirely blocked. He let out a furious roar and lunged forward, trying to shove his way past the officers, but the police were ready for him. The 2 large officers tackled him to the hardwood floor. A brief, violent struggle ensued, shaking the antique furniture, but Jamal was quickly overpowered. They forced his massive arms behind his back and locked a heavy pair of handcuffs onto his wrists. As the metallic click echoed through the room, a devastating wail erupted from the staircase. Rebecca fell completely to her knees. She gripped the wooden banister, sobbing hysterically as she watched the officers haul her husband up from the floor. Her comfortable life was instantly vaporized. She did not work. She relied entirely on Jamal's pawnshop income and shady deals to fund her lifestyle. With Jamal facing years in a state penitentiary for grand larceny, Rebecca was completely broke and entirely alone. "Please, Jamal!" Rebecca screamed, reaching her hand out toward him as the officers dragged him toward the front door. "What am I supposed to do? How am I going to pay the mortgage?" Jamal ignored her, glaring at me with pure venom as he was marched out of the house. I looked down at Rebecca, watching her weep on my stairs. She had happily helped him tear my closet apart, dreaming of the boat they would buy with my stolen diamonds. Now she was going to have to figure out how to survive on her own. The officers secured their grip on Bradley's arms and began marching him toward the open front door. The suffocating heat of the house seemed to finally break as a cool afternoon breeze swept in through the entryway. It carried the sharp scent of crushed leaves and the metallic tang of the police cruiser's exhaust. Bradley stumbled over the threshold. His expensive Italian leather shoes scraped clumsily against the stone porch. He looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant tech visionary who had demanded the pin to my family trust just an hour ago. He was completely defeated. His shoulders were slumped forward, and his chest heaved with heavy, erratic sobs. "Wait!" Bradley cried out, dragging his feet against the concrete to slow the officers down. "Please, just give me 1 minute. Let me speak to my wife." The 2 officers paused, looking back toward Agent Henderson, who gave a slow, firm nod. They held Bradley securely on the front porch, allowing him to turn his head back toward the foyer. I walked slowly out of the sweltering living room and stood in the doorway. The flashing red and blue lights from the police vehicles reflected off the pristine white columns of my historic estate. "Natalie, please look at me," Bradley begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, pathetic whine. "I am so sorry. I lost my mind. The stress of the business failing completely broke me. You have to believe me, Natalie. I never actually wanted to hurt you or Leo. It was Kelsey. She manipulated me. She got into my head and made me think this was the only way to save our family." I stood on the porch looking down at the man I had spent nearly a decade of my life loving and supporting. His face was stained with sweat and tears. He was desperately trying to play the victim, attempting to use the very vows he had broken to save himself from federal prison. "We built a life together," Natalie Bradley sobbed. his knees buckling slightly as the officers held him up. 9 years. We have a beautiful son. You are a kind, forgiving person. You do not want to see the father of your child locked in a cage. Please tell the federal agent you made a mistake. Tell him you gave me permission to sign the deed. Tell him the medical records were just a misunderstanding. I will go to rehab. I will go to therapy. I will do whatever you want. Just please do not let them take me away. His pathetic begging echoed across the manicured front lawn. Neighbors had started coming out of their expensive houses, standing on their driveways to watch the incredible spectacle unfolding at my estate. Bradley did not even care about the public humiliation anymore. He was entirely consumed by the terrifying reality of his impending prison sentence. He looked at me with wide, desperate eyes, waiting for the sympathetic, loving wife he had exploited for years to suddenly rescue him. But that woman did not exist anymore. He had murdered her slowly over the last 3 months with every crushed sedative he slipped into her tea and every fake smile he gave her before sneaking off to call his mistress. I looked at him and let a long, heavy silence hang in the cool afternoon air. I wanted him to feel the absolute weight of his own actions. "I cannot help you, Bradley," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. "I am just a crazy woman, remember? You paid a doctor to diagnose me with severe delusions. You told your mistress I was having a mental breakdown. You told the bank executive I belonged in a secure psychiatric facility. I am entirely unstable. Nobody listens to me." Bradley's jaw dropped open. The exact words Kelsey had used to mock me through the cellar air vent were now sealing his permanent fate. He realized in that exact moment that I had heard every single cruel thing they had said while I was trapped in the dark. There was no forgiveness left to exploit. There was no mercy to manipulate. "No, Natalie, wait!" Bradley shrieked as the realization fully washed over him. "You cannot do this. Please, take him away," I said, turning my back on him and walking slowly into the foyer. The officers did not give him another second to speak. They forcefully pulled Bradley down the porch steps and marched him across the paved driveway. He dragged his feet, sobbing and wailing like a terrified child. They reached the back of the local police cruiser. One officer firmly pushed Bradley's head down to protect it from the doorframe and shoved him aggressively into the cramped back seat. The heavy door of the police cruiser slammed shut with a definitive solid thud. It was the exact same heavy metallic sound the cellar door had made when Bradley locked me in the dark earlier that morning. But this time, he was the one trapped in a tiny cage, and there was absolutely no secret vault for him to escape into. The engine roared to life, and the cruiser slowly pulled out of my driveway, carrying my treacherous husband away from the massive, historic estate he had so desperately tried to steal. The engine roared to life, and the cruiser slowly pulled out of my driveway, carrying my treacherous husband away from the massive historic estate he had so desperately tried to steal. I stood on the front porch for a moment, watching the red and blue lights fade down the quiet suburban street. The suffocating heat of the afternoon was completely gone, replaced by a sudden, profound clarity. Agent Henderson turned toward the open doorway, where Diane and Rebecca were still lingering in the foyer. "The house is officially secured," he announced, his voice cutting through the lingering tension. "Ladies, you are not residents of this property, and the homeowner has made it exceedingly clear that you are no longer welcome. I need you to vacate the premises immediately." Rebecca, who had been weeping silently near the staircase, simply nodded. She looked completely shattered. Without Jamal and his illegal income, she had absolutely nothing left. She picked up her purse, avoiding my gaze entirely, and walked out the front door like a ghost. She walked down the driveway toward her car without looking back, leaving her mother behind. But Diane was an entirely different story. Even after watching her golden child get hauled away in handcuffs, her deeply ingrained entitlement refused to die. She aggressively wiped the running mascara from her cheeks and stood up straight, smoothing her wrinkled cashmere sweater. She lifted her chin, trying to muster the aristocratic superiority she had weaponized against me for the past 9 years. "Do not worry. I have absolutely no desire to stay in this cursed house, Diane sneered, glaring at me with pure venom. You may have fooled these officers today, Natalie, but you have not won. I am going back to my condo right now. I am going to call the best defense attorneys in the state. I am going to mortgage my home if I have to, and I am going to get my son out of jail. And when he gets out, we are going to sue you for every single penny you have for this ridiculous setup. I leaned against the heavy oak door frame and let out a soft, genuine laugh. The sound seemed to infuriate her even more. You are going to mortgage your home? I asked, raising an eyebrow. That is incredibly fascinating, Diane. I was not aware you owned a home to mortgage. Diane scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. You know exactly what I am talking about, my luxury condo overlooking the marina. The one Bradley bought for me 5 years ago so I would not have to live in the suburbs. I slowly shook my head. Bradley did not buy you that condo, Diane. Bradley could not even afford the maintenance fees on that building. I leased that condo through my real estate corporation. My trust has been paying the $6,000 monthly rent for the past 5 years. I let Bradley take the credit because I was trying to be a supportive wife and preserve his fragile ego. Diane's smug expression faltered. A flicker of genuine uncertainty crossed her eyes, but she quickly masked it with anger. That is a complete lie, she snapped. My name is on the mailbox. I have the keys in my purse right now. You had the keys, Diane. I corrected her, my tone dropping to a cold, hard edge. When I discovered Bradley's financial fraud 3 weeks ago, I also took a very close look at my corporate ledgers. I realized I was bleeding thousands of dollars a month to house a woman who treated me like absolute garbage. So I contacted the building management company. I paid the early termination penalty, and I officially canceled the lease. Diane froze completely. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and suddenly very old. What are you talking about? She whispered. The lease expired at exactly noon today, I explained, checking my watch. It is currently past 4 in the afternoon. The building manager already supervised the movers I hired to pack up your personal belongings. They put all your clothes and furniture into a short-term storage unit under your name. The locks on the condo door have already been completely changed. You have absolutely no legal right to enter that building. No. Diane gasped, her voice trembling wildly. No, you cannot do that. You cannot. That is my home. You cannot just throw me out onto the street. I did not throw you anywhere, I replied calmly. You threw yourself out the moment you walked into my house with a bottle of champagne to celebrate my imprisonment. You helped your son try to steal my wealth, and now you get to experience exactly what life looks like without my charity. Diane turned frantically to Agent Henderson. You have to arrest her, she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. This is an illegal eviction. Make her give me my house back. Agent Henderson simply crossed his arms. This is a civil matter regarding a corporate lease. Ma'am, he stated flatly, it has absolutely nothing to do with the FBI. But my order for you to leave this property is a criminal matter. If you do not step off this porch right now, I will have the local officers arrest you for criminal trespassing. Diane looked around wildly. Her son was in jail. Her daughter had already abandoned her. Her luxury lifestyle was completely erased. She let out a devastating guttural wail. She collapsed onto the front steps, sobbing hysterically and clutching her knees to her chest. She begged me for forgiveness. She pleaded for a place to stay. She promised she would change. But I just looked down at her with absolute indifference. You wanted me to rot in a dark cellar, Diane, I said softly. Now you can go rot on the street. The police officers firmly grabbed her arms and escorted her off my property. I watched her stumble down the driveway, weeping uncontrollably, with absolutely nowhere to go. The police officers firmly grabbed her arms and escorted her off my property. I watched her stumble down the driveway, weeping uncontrollably, with absolutely nowhere to go. Over the next few weeks, the absolute ruin of my former family unfolded with breathtaking speed. The federal justice system can sometimes move slowly, but when you hand them a perfectly packaged case of wire fraud, identity theft, and false imprisonment, complete with crystal clear video and audio evidence, the hammer drops incredibly fast. Bradley and Kelsey were formally indicted in federal court just 10 days after their arrest. I attended the preliminary bail hearing sitting quietly in the back row of the gallery. It was a stark, dramatic contrast to the luxurious lifestyle they had tried to steal from me. Bradley was escorted into the courtroom wearing a standard oversized Orange County jumpsuit. His face was gaunt, his hair was unwashed, and his eyes were completely hollow. Kelsey stood at the opposite end of the defense table wearing matching jail attire and refusing to even look in his direction. The federal prosecutor presented a mountain of evidence. They played the audio recording of Kelsey openly planning to flee the country with the stolen bank loan. They presented the fake medical records Bradley had physically forged to justify locking me in a dark cellar. They detailed the offshore trust accounts. The judge looked at the two of them with absolute disgust. He deemed them both severe flight risks and immediate dangers to the community. The ruling was swift and merciless. Bail was completely denied. They were remanded directly back to federal custody to await trial, facing mandatory minimum sentences that would easily put them behind bars for the next 15 years. There would be no tech empire and no tropical beaches for either of them. Jamal's situation in the state courts was equally catastrophic. The security footage from my master bedroom showing him violently prying open my biometric safe and stuffing my heirloom diamonds into a canvas duffel bag was an open and shut case of grand larceny. To make matters exponentially worse, the grand larceny charge gave the police probable cause to execute a search warrant on his pawnshop. The raid uncovered a massive trove of undocumented stolen goods and illegal firearms. Jamal's tough guy persona completely broke during his arraignment. He was facing over a decade in a state penitentiary, and his business assets were immediately seized by the government. But the legal consequences were only half of their punishment. The true destruction came from the absolute social fallout. Somehow, the police body cam footage from the afternoon of their arrest was leaked to a local news outlet and then rapidly spread across the internet. The video showed the entire humiliating spectacle in brutal high definition. It showed Jamal violently lifting Bradley off the floor by his collar. It showed Kelsey screaming vicious insults at my husband while her makeup melted down her face. It showed Diane hysterically begging the federal agent to spare her golden child. The clip went absolutely viral. The perfect aristocratic facade Diane had spent decades meticulously building evaporated overnight. Her high society friends, the women she used to drink expensive wine with while bragging about Bradley's fake corporate success, completely cut her off. She was permanently banned from her exclusive country club. Since I had canceled her luxury condo lease, she was forced to move into a tiny, run-down apartment complex on the very outskirts of the city. To pay her rent, the woman who used to mock my real estate appraisal career was forced to take a minimum wage job working the cash register at a local discount grocery store. Her designer cashmere sweaters were replaced by an itchy polyester uniform. Customers who recognized her from the viral arrest video would frequently point and whisper as she bagged their canned goods. She spent her days standing on her aching feet scanning barcodes and swallowing her massive pride. Rebecca fared no better. With Jamal sitting in a jail cell and his pawnshop permanently shuttered, her bank immediately foreclosed on their heavily mortgaged house. She was forced to pack whatever clothes she had left and move into the tiny, cramped apartment with Diane. Having never worked a real job in her adult life, Rebecca had to take a position wiping down tables at a fast food restaurant. The two women who had happily helped tear my bedroom apart were now sharing a single bathroom and working grueling low-wage shifts just to keep the electricity turned on. They spent their evenings bitterly blaming each other for the collapse of their lives, entirely trapped in a miserable prison of their own making. 6 months have passed since that sweltering afternoon. The historic estate is quiet now, filled only with the peaceful sounds of a home that is finally safe. I am standing right now in the center of the Prohibition-era speakeasy vault. But the heavy stone door is propped wide open. This room is no longer a hiding place. It is no longer a defensive bunker where I had to retreat to protect my child from the monsters living upstairs. It has reverted back to exactly what I originally built it to be. It is a masterpiece of historical restoration and a quiet sanctuary of my own independence. I ran my hands over the polished mahogany bar and smiled. The monitors that once displayed the terrifying invasion of my home are now turned off. I do not need to constantly watch my own hallways anymore. The threat has been completely neutralized. I reclaimed my peace and I secured my future. My appraisal business has actually doubled in revenue since the viral incident. High-end clients appreciate a professional who knows exactly how to protect valuable assets. I used some of the new profits to completely replace the master bedroom door that Jamal destroyed. I also ripped out the old carpets and refinished the hardwood floors, erasing every single physical trace of their presence in my home. The house feels lighter now. It breathes differently. The oppressive weight of Bradley's constant failures and Diane's suffocating judgment has been entirely lifted from the atmosphere. I realize that restoring a historic house is very much like rebuilding your own life. You have to be willing to tear out the rotting wood, no matter how foundational it might seem. You have to clear away the toxic mold before it poisons the air you breathe. I heard the light patter of footsteps coming down the stone stairs. Leo ran into the vault, holding a brightly colored superhero comic book. He climbed up onto one of the vintage leather club chairs and made himself comfortable. He looked up at me with a bright, happy smile that completely erased the memory of his terrified tears from that dark day. He has grown so much in just a few months. Without the constant tension of a failing marriage hanging over our heads, he has blossomed into a relaxed and joyful child. "Mommy, are we going to order pizza for dinner tonight?" he asked, swinging his legs happily against the leather chair. "Yes, baby," I replied, walking over and kissing the top of his head. "We can order whatever you want. We are celebrating today." Leo tilted his head slightly, his bright eyes looking curious. "What are we celebrating?" I looked around the beautiful, secure room. "We are celebrating freedom, Leo. We are celebrating the fact that our superhero base will always just be a fun place to read comic books from now on. The bad guys are locked away, and they are never coming back to bother us ever again." Leo beamed and went right back to reading his book, completely unburdened and safe. Watching him, I felt a profound sense of closure. When you marry into a family, you naturally expect them to embrace you. You want to believe that the people who share your holiday dinners and celebrate your milestones actually have your best interests at heart. You try so hard to fit into their mold, to earn their respect, and to keep the peace. But the harsh reality is that toxic people do not care about loyalty. They only care about what they can extract from you. Bradley, Diane, Jamal, Rebecca and Kelsey all looked at me and saw nothing but a resource to be exploited. They assumed my kindness was a weakness. They believed that because I was a dedicated wife, I would just quietly accept their abuse and hand over the fruits of my hard labor to save them from their own catastrophic failures. They thought I would surrender my life simply because they demanded it. But they severely underestimated what happens when you push an independent woman into a dark corner and threaten her child. I did not just survive their trap. I turned it entirely upside down and let it crush them. They thought the darkness of the cellar would break my spirit. But they forgot that roots grow strongest in the dark. I built my life brick by brick, and nobody gets to come in and tear it down simply because they feel entitled to my success. Blood and marriage certificates do not give anyone the right to disrespect you or steal your peace. True family is not determined by an arbitrary legal document or a shared last name. It is determined by mutual respect and unconditional support. Sometimes the most empowering thing you can possibly do is recognize your own incredible worth and completely sever the ties with the people trying to dim your light. You owe them absolutely nothing. If you have ever had to lock out the people who were supposed to love you to protect your peace, let me know in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to a toxic family member who underestimated your strength? Tell me your story. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe in fighting back and reclaiming your life. Thank you so much for watching, and remember that your greatest weapon against toxic people is your own unbreakable success. The harrowing story of Natalie being locked in a cellar by those meant to love her highlights a profound and often uncomfortable truth. Your greatest protection against toxic manipulation is your own independence. When abusive partners or family members attempt to tear you down, they almost always rely on your vulnerability or dependence to maintain their control. In this narrative, Bradley and his family assumed they could easily overwrite Natalie's reality because they fundamentally underestimated her. They believed they could use her compassion and commitment to the marriage as a weapon to strip her of her assets and her sanity. However, Natalie's salvation was not a sudden stroke of luck or a rescuer kicking down the door. It was the quiet, meticulous work she had done years prior to secure her finances, build her career, and understand her legal rights. She survived the betrayal because she refused to be a passive passenger in her own life. This translates directly to our everyday reality. Emotional abuse and gaslighting are deeply disorienting, and victims are frequently made to feel crazy, isolated, or entirely powerless. But when you actively cultivate self-reliance, whether that means maintaining financial stability, nurturing a strong support network outside of a toxic inner circle, or simply holding an unshakable knowledge of your own truth, you systematically strip abusers of their leverage. The ultimate revenge against those who try to diminish your worth is never about matching their cruelty. It is about stepping fully into your own strength, setting impenetrable boundaries, and building a life they can no longer access. Take a moment today to evaluate your own boundaries. Take one step towards securing your personal independence, and share this message with someone who might need the courage to walk away.